Yeah, hi guys.
Monday night study. So tonight we're broadcasting on YouTube.
Yeah, all right.
Good.
Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. So tonight we're broadcasting on YouTube, Facebook, and Subsplash, which is the app and the website, and Telegram also. So we're continuing to do that just to kind of test.
Hi Diane, hi Trace.
Well, tonight what I wanted to go through kind of a short study with you. Some of them are always long and some are short. It's just the way it is. But we've been talking about the Exodus. Last week we went through some of the Egyptian text or secular text about Egypt and figuring out who the Pharaoh of the Exodus was. And we found some really interesting things. So I hope you guys liked that. This week, one of the questions that came up was about, and it comes up every so often, was about lost books of the Bible. You know, and this idea that we had a bunch of books and somebody decided to cut a bunch of stuff out, things like that. Now, the original autographs, I think all of us believe, were divinely inspired. What we have today are not the original autographs, so there could be spelling errors, copyist errors, things like that in some of the Greek manuscripts, and you can see slight differences like that. But that's a different question as to whether some whole books were taken out or added or things like that. So I wanted to kind of go through this. So basically, the story that's given in just about every place, and by that I mean the church fathers, the places that I would look would be like the Talmud and other rabbinic sources for Orthodox Judaism today. And then there's the church fathers, which would be the very early fathers and what they taught, specifically those taught by the apostles. And then there'd be the Dead Sea Scrolls, so it would be whatever the Essenes taught. And then there might be other things like Jewish historians, like Josephus, things like that. So basically, when we go back to that, you have the church fathers, the scrolls, the Sadducees, Pharisees, basically everybody, telling the story of how the canon was closed in the time of Ezra. And we have that basic story in the Ezra Apocalypse, which is kind of funny because the Ezra Apocalypse is outside the canon, but it's telling you the canon was closed. But it's one thing that everyone understands. Now, we have 66 books in our Bible. The Protestants do. Other Orthodox and Catholic and other groups will have other books in their canon, one or two or a bunch. But one thing that we all agree on is that 66 books are our Bible. And we usually talk about the canon, like there's one. And really, we should be talking about the canons. There's an Old Testament canon and a New Testament canon. And by that, we mean is a collection of books that was started and then finished. So, for instance, if we start from the beginning with Genesis, for instance, which would be Moses, Moses is going to come along and say something along the lines of, I'm checking a couple things here, making sure I'm sounding right and for everything. Okay, but Moses is going to come along and he's going to write Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now, who's Moses to write something like that? Well, he proves himself by being, he says God's sent him to deliver Israel and these things are going to happen. And then there's the 10 plagues of Egypt, the pillar of fire, the death of the firstborn, traveling through the wilderness, all the different miracles that happened. And Moses or no human being can do something like that. So obviously the story Moses is telling is true. And then he, is told by God to write, and he writes. So the same with Joshua. Joshua goes in and does, there are certain miracles that happen. In the time of the judges, there are certain miracles that happen. And there are prophets that raise up. And the prophets basically put these books together and create a canon. Now, a prophet is someone who is told of God to do something, and he has gifts or powers from God. So, for instance, we remember Elijah the prophet and the famous passage in Kings where one commander comes and said, "Man of God, come down. You're going before the king. Come down or we'll come up and get you." Well, and he says, "If I be a man of God, let fire come down and consume you." And that happens. And then you have the second commander of 50 comes out and finds him. And basically, we consider him the stupidest person in the entire Old Testament to simply say, "Man of God, come down here or we'll come up and get you." But he's surrounded by 50 smoking corpses. It doesn't make any sense. But he does that, and he says the same thing again. "If I am a man of God, let fire come down and consume you." And that happens. Now there's 100 smoking corpses. So then the commander of the third 50 comes out. He's intelligent. He sees what's going on, possibly a believer. And he says, "The king has commanded me to bring you. If I don't bring you," basically it might be my head, "would you please come with us?" And that's fine. You're not even showing respect to Elijah at that point, but to God and God ordained authority. But point being is Elijah could do miracles. He's the kind of person that it's pretty obvious. Another passage I like about Elijah is at a certain point, the king wants his head, okay? And so he decides, God tells him, "At this point, I want you to go before the king and tell him the following things." So he actually goes to Jerusalem, goes up to the palace of the king, and the guard there, it's a guy named Obadiah. Later on, he'll become the prophet Obadiah, but right now he's just a king's guard, but he's a believer. And so he comes up and he says, I need an audience with the king. And Obadiah's reaction is priceless. It's like, "Oh, no, I'm not going to let you in, because if I tell the king you're in my custody, and then he's going to say, bring him in, and I'm going to start to bring you in, the king wants your life. What's going to happen is that God is going to whisk you away like he always does. And then it's going to be my head. No, go away." And then Elijah tells him, "No, the Lord has commanded me to come here and deliver a message. So I have to deliver the message first before anything happens." And it's like, okay, and the process happens. So that tells us several things. Everybody knew a prophet, and nobody messed with a prophet if you had half a brain. The king apparently did not. And another thing, whisk you away every time you get in trouble. To put that in Christian terms, every time someone tried to kill Elijah, he was raptured from this place to some other place. We see the same thing in the book of Acts. When Philip went to talk to the Ethiopian eunuch, talked to the eunuch, baptized him, and immediately the Spirit had caught him away to another place. So things like that happen, and those are men of God. So if I come online or someone else comes online and said, "I'm the prophet, whatever, and you got to pay attention to me, and you got to give me a bunch of money," fine, prove it. Prove you're a prophet, and we'll listen to you. If you're a prophet, it should be really easy for you to prove yourself without hurting anybody. And of course, if someone says, "I'm a prophet," I'm not going to come against them. At least they are a prophet. And my attitude is like that because I'm a believer. I really honestly believe. But there's a lot of con artists out there too. Well, those stories, kind of bringing it back to our study tonight about the lost books. So the prophets of old did things, proved themselves, made localized prophecies. We see Jeremiah and Isaiah giving prophecies to people local. Things are going to happen. It's obvious that they're prophets, so their books are added to the canon. So you have this continuation of books being added until the time of Ezra, when we were told by the Holy Spirit in the Ezra Apocalypse that the canon is closed. In the Ezra Apocalypse, it simply says that it's closed to 24 books. And that shouldn't confuse us because we have 39 books in our Old Testament. The difference between the Jewish Bible and the Protestant or Christian Bible is just how we divide those books. So we have 1st and 2nd Samuel, it's 2 books. In the Jewish canon, it's just the book of Samuel. We have 1st and 2nd Kings, that's 1 book called Kings. We have 1st and 2nd Chronicles, that's 1 book called Chronicles. We have Ezra and we have Nehemiah. They have Ezra and Nehemiah. And then we have 12 separate books that we refer to as the 12 minor prophets. They have that as 1 book called the 12. So if you do that, it's the same exact books, the same about verses, the same information, but instead of counting it as 39 books, they count it as 24. And so it's just the way they put the canon together. But the point is that we have that. So what's going to happen is, under inspiration of the Holy Spirit, the canon is closed. And then there's a prophecy later that during the age of grace, there would be a new priesthood, Melchizedekian one, a new canon, new information, and that would be put together and then sealed. And so this is the concept we have. And again, we usually refer to the Bible as the canon, but the Bible really is the 2 canons, the Old and the New Testament. Testament is kind of like a canon or a collection of books. And so that being the case, we know there were writings pre-Moses. So you might even say there is a pre-Mosaic canon, which consisted of something. I mean, we really don't know much of anything about it. In my opinion, it would have been patriarchal writings, and we're beginning to get those back now. It's entirely possible when the Lord comes back at the second coming, there will be another canon written about this is how it actually took place for the people in the millennial reign. Maybe, maybe not. But it would be interesting to finally learn that there were 4 canons. In either case, it's not important, but the point is the Old Testament canon is what it should be, and the New Testament canon is what it should be. So the 400 years between the canons is not, we shouldn't take those writings and try to put them in the Old Testament. People have done that, Orthodox groups, and I'm not slamming them or anything. Technically, the canon is the canon. Extra biblical stuff is extra biblical stuff. That doesn't mean
Yeah, I had to stop him because Gabe come home.
that an extra biblical writing may not be 100% accurate history, from an eyewitness or something. It may actually contain a real prophecy. We know in the New Testament under Agabus, he was a prophet. He ran the school of the prophets. There were other prophets that came with him down to see Paul. And so the gift of prophet or prophecy or the office of prophet was still going strong. And even if you think that that's capped or gone, we still had words of wisdom and words of knowledge, which are kind of similar, but it's not to be added to the canon. And I think one reason for that is the whole idea that someone's thinking of becoming a Christian, they want to know a little bit about it. Reading 66 books is quite a challenge in and of itself. What if it was 660 books? What if it was 6,000 books, even if it's just little 10-page books? Some people are going to say, I'm just doomed. I can't read it. I can't figure it out. It'll never happen. I won't even mess with it. So we have what we need. As Peter says, everything we need for salvation and a life and godliness in the New Testament. So in reality, all we need is the New Testament. But when you get to the New Testament, like you're reading Galatians, for instance, if it says Abraham and Sarah and Hagar are symbolic or similar to teaching the concept of the covenants, etc. And I was to ask you, who is this Hagar guy, or this, is it a guy or a girl? Who's Abraham? What kind of a thing is? I don't understand. I don't know anything about him. So if you go back to Genesis and read about Abraham and Sarah and Hagar, you understand enough to go, okay, I understand now what Paul is saying. So now we can go on. like to know more about Abraham, but it's not important for, say, for Galatians. So it's that kind of thing that we're looking at. And then, so we're looking at the scrolls, and even what we consider Roman Catholic Apocrypha as being historical, may or may not be prophetic, may or may not be tampered with. But in either case, we don't put it in the canon. The book of Enoch actually tells you that there is going to be a collection of works that the righteous live their life by. So that would be our canon or canons. And that it is specifically not to be added to the canon. It is to be kept separate for people in the last generation, which is about now. So, and it contains prophecy and other things. So that's kind of important. And even Jude in the New Testament will quote Enoch. So obviously the Holy Spirit prompted Jude to quote it for a reason, so that we would know it exists and that it might be important at a certain generation. So really important to add that. So just because it's not in the Bible, in the 66 books, doesn't mean you just toss it out the window and never read it. But even if we find out it's legitimate history, prophecy, something, that doesn't mean we add it to the canon. So the Holy Spirit wants us to keep those things separate. So with that in mind, I wanted to look at the New Testament just a little bit and talk about the concept of canons. So, okay, just as a side note here, it's November. Wow, where did I go? It is April 11th. So April 11th is Monday. On the Essene calendar, it is the 6th day of unleavened bread. We had Passover always on a Tuesday, so it was last Tuesday. And then the week of unleavened bread. And then after Passover week is first fruits. Now on the Christian calendar, Gregorian, this was Palm Sunday, last Sunday. And next Sunday, which is this one, will be Resurrection Sunday. So this time it actually falls, and the calendars are just different. They're just going to be slightly different each year, but they're going to be always within a week of each other. So first fruits. And then of course, when we get to Pentecost, it'll be, I think, June 5th this time. Yeah, June 5th. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of show you that so we can look at that. 2022. This Sunday's Resurrection Sunday. It also happens to be first fruits on the Essene.
That's Stu. He's on Rumble, isn't he? You got to follow him on Rumble. He's not on YouTube. Because I don't know the guys he's talking about.
Calendar. Because some of you have asked things like, well, it doesn't seem to fit. Well, part of it is because of the way the calendar is. Some years it will fit, and other years it will not. And we're really familiar with that with things like Easter on our Gregorian calendar, because Easter is calculated from the moon. So it's the first Sunday after the first new moon, full moon after the first new moon, after the spring equinox, I believe is how it's calculated. And so it varies. It's March, April-ish, somewhere in there. Anyway, just wanted to share that with you. So it's kind of neat. So this is from our writing on the patriarchs. So we've got a patriarchal writing. Remember what we were saying is that according to the Essenes, they say that the tradition of the elders, which is the Pharisee law, which is what the Bible calls the Pharisaical law, which is the tradition of the elders, was made up. And the reason they say that is because it contradicts what the patriarchs say. Now, what we're doing is the Old Testament is our rule and guide of faith. It's the one and only canon at that point. So it's the thing. You want to judge everything by the Old Testament. But when you get a phrase or a word, and there's a couple of different ideas on what it means, the oral Torah, or tradition of the elders, say it means one thing. They're going to say that can't be because that contradicts the very clear definition of what this means in the patriarchal writings. And they said the patriarchal writings are the testaments, like a last will and testament from Adam through Levi. So there's some 40 of these at least. And so some of them has been preserved in some of the Orthodox places, and a good amount of parts of them have been preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So in this one, this is one of the testaments of, it's the book, or the testament of Benjamin. Benjamin is one of the 12 sons of Jacob. The Apostle Paul is, according to the New Testament, a Benjamite. So he's of that tribe. So he's a good Pharisee at first, but he can't be a priest because he's not even of the Levitical line, let alone Zadok. So, but this is what it says here, and I just want us to look at this. This is pretty interesting. He's talking about several things, and in each one of these, it's like, I made the mistake of doing this, or I saw my brothers do this. Don't make the same mistakes. It's the same kind of stuff you would tell your kids. Drinking sounds like fun, but let me tell you what happened one time when I was out drinking, and you really don't want to go there, you know. And so he's giving all this good practical advice. Part of the practical advice, of course, is to accept Messiah when he comes. I understand that some people would reject him, and they give little bits and pieces of a lot of things. This particular place, so this is Testament of Benjamin, chapter 11, it's a small chapter, says, I will no longer be called a ravening wolf on account of your ravages, but a worker of the Lord.
I was never
the
here.
Tetragrammaton, the name of God, distributing food to them that work that which is good. So Benjamin was called a ravening wolf, and we remember this back in Judges and in Joshua and in Judges, rather, the things that are going on as they come into Israel. And at one point, they have a civil war, basically, and they're very good fighters, very tenacious. To win the war, the other brothers, the other tribes, had to almost wipe out the tribe of Benjamin. So Benjamin is known as a ravaging wolf. He'll take and destroy, and he's really hard to get rid of. Okay, so we understand those things. So he's talking about in the time in the future, I will no longer be referred to as the ravaging wolf, but there'll be a different ravaging wolf. It says we will be, or he will be referred to as a worker of the Lord, distributing food to them, which is good. One will rise up from my seed in the latter times. And I want to kind of put this together here. So one rises up from the seed of Benjamin, a Benjamite, okay, in the latter times. And this is why we have to look very careful at the definitions and understand the calendar. There's a beginning of an age and there's an end of an age. And the end of each age is called the latter days or the end times of that age. So the end of the last age was when the Messiah was to come, start the age of grace, and a lot of things happen. The end times, or the end of the last days of our age, takes place with a 7-year tribulation and Antichrist, and then the second coming of that same Messiah to set up the kingdom age. And so it's an interesting concept. So at this point, in the later times of his age, because the first age ends with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. They're in that age where the age of Torah has started, which is what it was called. So in the latter times of that, something will happen. So this is 1st century AD.
Yeah, Diane, they get in a lot of trouble if they prescribe that for COVID. Yeah, I've been well aware of that. Thank you.
When this should be happening, you know, give or take a century, but somewhere at the end of the age. So one rises up from my seed in the latter times, beloved of the Lord, hearing his voice on earth, enlightening with new knowledge all the Gentiles. So he's going to be a representative or a sent one, a missionary, an apostle, depending on how you translate it, to the Gentiles. So this is a apostle to the Gentiles. So this Benjamite, okay, he's going to be bursting in on Israel for salvation with the light of knowledge, tearing it away from them like a wolf and giving it to the synagogue of the Gentiles. And this is important because basically it's saying that just like Benjamin was ferocious and dangerous and
so
would wipe out anybody that came against it, Paul was of the same mind. If this is right and that's wrong, it stops now. Nobody's going to do this. Fine, I'll do it because I care about the Lord. So he persecuted the church because he loved the Lord, thought the church was a cult. When he had his vision on the road to Damascus, who are you, Lord, he said, and the Lord said, I'm Jesus whom you persecute. And I can just imagine yourself being the type of person that's going to do everything he can for God, finding out you've been dead wrong. And because of that, you have messed up big time. You've put the Lord, the real people of the Lord, in prison. You've had some of them executed, you know. But instead of walking away, he still has a desire to serve the Lord. I'm wrong. I'm on the wrong side. Fine. I switch sides. And he continued to fight for, excuse me, it's allergy season. He continued to fight for the Lord with the same ferocity, and tried to take the concept of Judaizing away and going back to the Noahide, the Essene way, what Christ taught, these kind of things. So this is what's going on. So this is a prophecy about him. But notice what he says. So he takes the truth and the light.
Yeah, Gigabyte, my brother's got COVID now. He's pretty sick, actually.
Knowledge and some new things too, and tears it away from the Jews, which are rejecting Messiah anyway, and giving him to the Gentiles because he is, as it says here, tearing it away and giving it to the synagogue of the Gentiles. Now, the word synagogue it's the same word in Greek as ecclesia, which we get church from. So it's a group of people, of believers. So you might have Noahides, which are Gentiles. You might have native-born and/or converts to Judaism. Maybe there's separate synagogues for each. Maybe there's a synagogue where they all get together. But it's like a church, okay? We might have a church, an ethnic church somewhere that speaks only that language. So I wouldn't go there often because I don't understand anything. I would go to someone that, speaks English. And maybe we'll have a service in both translated so we can all get together. But a synagogue, nonetheless, is basically a church. But this is telling us right now there's a synagogue of Moses, and that's the only way you can get salvation is by going through Moses, kind of, looking at these things, waiting on Messiah to come. There's a time coming when that will be broken. There's many prophecies in here about the Levites rejecting Messiah when he comes, Messiah setting up a new order with the Gentiles, a Melchizedekian type priesthood, rather than the Levitical one. So at this point, then, he tears away the knowledge and everything from the Jews, in other words, the corrupt system, not the Jews themselves, but basically non-believers, so the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and gives it to the true believers, which is going to be done in a Gentile fashion. So it's going to be a Gentile synagogue, or we could call it a church, a Gentile church, a Gentile synagogue. It's mainly Gentiles because there's a lot more Gentiles than Jews, is the only thing. But it's going to be a ecclesia, called out ones from Jews, Gentiles, just anybody who accepts and believes in Messiah. So look at this. So he's going to do this. So what about this light and stuff? So if I have revelation from God, some sort of light, I could just tell you guys this, but I'm going to die one day, right? So I need to write this down. So there should be a written record of what happened to me and what I say and my teachings and that kind of stuff. So what happens here is, so this Benjamite does this, and he tears it away and he gives it to the synagogue of the Gentiles until the consummation of the ages. So the final end of all the ages. So at the very least, it's the next age. So that would be the end of the age of grace, which is coming quickly when the second coming occurs. So during this time period, from the first coming of the Messiah to at least the second coming of the Messiah, there's going to be a synagogue of the Gentiles. They're going to have their own written canon or testament. And this Benjamin is going to have writings in this. Now notice what it says, until the consummation of the ages, he will be in the synagogues of the Gentiles. It can't be a guy because he's dead and buried. So his writings are in the synagogues of the Gentiles and among their rulers as a strain of music in the mouth of all. It's finally, we get to figure out the answers. It's got the answers of everything in it, and it's beautiful, it's musical. He will be inscribed in the holy books. So remember, the Old Testament is closed. So how is that possible? Apparently there's a new canon or a New Testament, if you want to call it that. So there's an Old Testament and there will be a New Testament. His writings, this Benjamite, his writings will be in the New Testament.
Wow.
It's pretty interesting. Both his work and his word. What is the vast majority of the book of Acts? The book of Acts is the history of how the church started. And it begins with a lot of people, but the vast majority of the book is all about the Apostle Paul, who was a Benjamite,
I
who,
never knew that.
as he goes through the missionary journeys, writes several epistles to several churches, which, what do you know, are included in the New Testament. Pretty interesting. He will be chosen, a chosen one for God, or a chosen one of God forever. And because of him, my father Jacob instructed me, saying, he will fill up that which lacks from your tribe. So this is interesting. Jacob had understanding of not only the age of grace and a lot of other things that are going on, and that's consistent with all the other scrolls, talking about the age of grace and the changes that would come and other things. So there's a lot in here to study, but just showing you this because, in other words, there's a prophecy that the Messiah would come, and in another place it talks about the canon of the Gentiles would actually have writings of Messiah. And I'm thinking Matthew 24, for instance, the Messiah teaching prophecy. So we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have the book of Acts. And then we have a small section or a good amount of books written by this Benjamite guy. And then we have the general epistles, other disciples of the Messiah, and then the book of Revelation. And that's the canon as it closes. Okay, the New Testament canon. So with this, let me flip over to this. I want to show you a couple things. This is from our book, Ancient Church Fathers. So basically we have the received text and the critical text, but it's basically Greek. And I wanted to share with you this here. So we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospels. And then we have...
Diane, can you send me that on Skype, please? That looks really good. Not good, but very, good information.
Acts, and then we have Paul's epistles and the other epistles. So this is what we've had from the beginning. Now the church fathers will teach this, and they talk about heretics coming along and cutting things out of the canon or maybe adding to it. And so the three main heretics that we're concerned with in this particular study was Marcion, Tatian, and the Ebionites. And it was interesting, the other day I was looking something up and I found a group that are actually modern day Marcionites trying to bring back his teachings. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. Because there's a prophecy out of 3 Corinthians, again, not to be added to the canon, but probably something you might want to read. But there's a prophecy in 3 Corinthians, the only real extra piece of information in it is that this Gnostic junk that was there in the 1st century would come back toward the end of time. So we have the party of the circumcision coming back, which is hyper Hebrew roots. We have Gnosticism coming back, and we see that all over the internet. But the Marcionites, that's what's interesting. Each had their own canons of scripture by cutting out portions of scripture to get rid of the evidence that contradicted their teachings. And so here's an example here. So Marcion, he rejected the Old Testament. The entire Old Testament is written by some evil God that has nothing to do with Jesus and salvation. So the Jews are out throughout the Old Testament.
Yeah, Gigabyte. I remember when she was born.
Just going to do the New Testament. But he also used Luke, the Gospel of Luke. But Luke is all about the birth of Christ and everything. So he used a cut-up version, taking out references to Jesus being creator, because he didn't like that. So all the references, it's just a watered-down version of Luke. He also used some of Paul's epistles, but he cut out pieces of them that he didn't like. And he created the Gospel of Paul. And we still have pieces of these things. And so people that don't know the history, and this is all written by the church fathers, so it's out there, it's been out there for centuries. Someone will dig up the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Paul, Gospel of Mary. You know, those are all Gnostic works put out by cults. It's a bunch of garbage. And according to them, this is that way. Now, this was thought to be, for the longest time, the church fathers really just not liking the other denomination. Nobody's really that bad, you know. Nazis are never that bad, you know, they're that kind of thing. But in 1948, the Nag Hammadi library was discovered, and it's the Gnostic library, the Gnostic Gospels and all that stuff in Nag Hammadi, Egypt. Sure enough, those people are just as bad as we thought they were, or we've been told they were. So that's Marcion. Tatian, actually, he's an interesting story. Tatian created the Encratites, which is a Gnostic denomination in the first or second century. The Apostle John taught Polycarp, worked with Polycarp for years in ministry. Polycarp had two disciples, Justin Martyr, two main disciples, Justin Martyr and Irenaeus. Fantastic books that those guys wrote. And it's cool to have eyewitnesses of Polycarp and testifying they occasionally saw John, things like that. But Justin Martyr, one of his disciples was this guy here, Tatian, and he seemed to be a good Christian. One of the things that he did was he created something called the Diatessaron. The Diatessaron is simply a harmony of the Gospels. So you take all four Gospels and make a harmony of them, just kind of combining everything into one. Did an excellent job. We have the Diatessaron in the Church Father archive, so you can get it, read it. It's pretty cool. But later on, he apostatized. He becomes very violent in nature, forms what's called the Encratites, or the self-perfected ones. They think they can basically save themselves through Gnostic meditation, the whole 9 yards. So when he does this, he creates his own canon. So it says, and in the chart here, he used a cut-up version of the harmony of the Gospels, which is the Diatessaron, with references of Christ's divinity removed. Again, they don't like Christ being God. It seems like that's the one thing all the cults have in common. No Trinity, no deity of Christ. It was more than that. He cut a lot of stuff out, but that was the main idea. So if you pick up a Diatessaron today, it may or may not be the original. For the longest time, the Eastern Church, like Eastern Orthodox in Europe, the Eastern Church, for I think several centuries, they used the Diatessaron instead of the four Gospels. But when this became kind of really messed up and floating around, they basically all decided to go back to the four Gospels and not use the Diatessaron. So he rejected all of Paul's epistles, calling Paul totally apostate. And he did use the second Clement. First Clement and the recognitions of Clement are amazing. Second Clement may or may not have been legit, but again, he's just going to use it to try to teach things he likes, that kind of thing. And then there's the Ebionites. The Ebionites were founded, I'm trying to think, by the guy named Ebion, who partnered with another guy who was a Sadducee. And those two actually were at the Acts 15 council, according to the church fathers. So when it says some people supposedly came down from James saying you can't be saved unless you get circumcised and do the law of Moses, and they're causing this big debate. And James said, well, first off, I never sent anybody to say anything like that. But as far as the issue, and then you have the whole thing in chapter 15. So Ebion and I can't remember the other guy's name, but they got together and formed the Ebionite gospel. Okay, so the gospel of the Ebionites, also called the gospel of the Hebrews. So they used a cut-up version of the gospel of Matthew in Hebrew and called it the gospel of the Hebrews. Now, sometimes when you're reading church fathers, they'll talk about how cool the gospel of the Hebrews is. They're referring to the Hebrew version of Matthew, because when you read it in Hebrew, you'll notice things that you don't in Greek, and it's just really cool. but it's Matthew. It's the same exact thing. But then there is a
Yeah, can we help? I was never here.
Gnostic book of Matthew. So the Gospel of the Ebionites is what it's usually called to differentiate the two. So sometimes you'll find a church father saying that the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew is corrupt, it's horrible. And then other times you'll say, no, it's really cool. They're talking about two different books. But in each of these cases, we're talking about, we're going to cut up either Luke, the Diatessaron, or Matthew. So those are good Bible, the Gospels.
Wow.
And he rejects all of Paul's epistles, saying Paul's apostate. Today we have people that are hyper-dispensational that say we shouldn't read the Gospels because that's Jesus' work with the Jews. It's actually the finishing part of the Old Testament. So nothing Jesus says really has any bearing on us, and even part of Acts. But at a certain part, like Acts 13 or 15 or somewhere, then we start paying attention to it, and we follow the epistles of Paul. We also don't pay any attention to Hebrews and a couple of others because that's for a later time. That's hyper-dispensationalism, and that's absolutely ridiculous, because even in the epistles of Paul that they explain, or that they accept, he explains that everything is written for our learning. The entire canons, both of the entire contents of both canons.
Oh, it's clearing up,
And
guys.
Dead Sea Scrolls and everything else. It's written for your understanding. Okay, so you don't just throw something out like that. And remember, we've got one of the Dead Sea Scrolls saying that this Apostle Paul, this Benjamite, is going to be the apostle to the Gentiles. And when Paul went before James and said, you know the prophecy, I'm a Benjamite, you know what I've been doing, here's what's happened and how the Lord has blessed it. And you look at the evidence, obviously no other Benjamite, is doing anything like this. And the Lord is blessing you. People are coming, Gentiles are coming to the Lord. Obviously, you're the one prophesied. So you are the apostle to the Gentiles. We're going to give you the right hand of fellowship, and very proud to finally meet you, the guy that we've been, studying about for centuries. But it's really cool to see this. So that being the case, if the Dead Sea Scrolls tell you the answer to all of your questions about the law and things like that are in the epistles of Paul, just go study the epistles of Paul. Even if you study nothing else, memorize the epistles of Paul. I mean, other than if you throw Hebrews in there, other than Hebrews, Romans, 1st, 2nd Corinthians, those are the big ones. The rest of them are really small, and you can read them 100 times in a year. But make sure you understand them really well. They have the answers to everything. So we definitely don't want anybody that rejects Paul. We have some of the Hebrew roots people that do that these days. Paul is apostate. We don't do anything with Paul. We're going to cut that out of the canon. Well, if you say anything like that, basically what you're saying is that the prophets of old didn't know what they were doing. But it gets back to this idea again, lost books of the Bible, or people pulling things out of the Bible or putting things into the Bible. And this is the concept. So with this in mind, we'll finish our study. I want to show you one other thing. So there's something called a Muratonian canon fragment. And it's just called that because it was an Italian guy, Muratoni, who found the canon, or the canon fragment. It's thought to be written by Caius, because there's other documents that talk about he did something like this. So it may or may not have been written by Church Father Caius. He was a disciple of one of the disciples of Irenaeus, if I remember correctly.
Guys, I'll come back to this in a minute. I want to show that link Han put up about Klaus Schwab, whatever his name is. Should be on my history. Yeah, there it is.
You're living health first. There's no such thing as too early.
Living health first is knowing when to listen to your body.
And when to tell it to keep going.
Don't just get health insurance. Get health first with NIB.
Are you miles away? Trying to rent your house in India? Get guaranteed rent and end-to-end property management with no broker NRI services that offer 24/7 assistance and a relationship manager.
One world religion has arrived, and it unites all of humanity. God is dead, according to the World Economic Forum, who have also declared that Jesus is fake news and that WEF leaders have acquired divine powers to rule over humanity. According to the WEF, a new one world religion has arrived, and it unites all of humanity in worshipping at the altar of climate science, techno-communism, and eugenics. If you find it hard to believe Klaus Schwab's WEF would go this far, you clearly haven't been paying attention to developments in recent times. Klaus Schwab's right-hand man, Yuval Noah Harari, has announced that the WEF has been so successful in its plans that it's acquiring divine powers of creation and destruction. The blasphemy doesn't stop there. Harari also promises that the WEF will turn humans into gods.
Developing even bigger powers than ever before. We are really acquiring divine powers of creation and destruction. We are really upgrading humans into gods. We are acquiring, for instance, the power to re-engineer life.
The WEF is also increasingly hostile to Christianity and other major religions. If you read between the lines just a little, it's clear that the WEF is consciously attempting to supplant Jesus.
I mean, all this story about Jesus rising from the dead and being the Son of God, this is fake news. Humans are now hackable animals. You know, the whole idea that humans have, you know, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over.
According to the WEF, Jesus is fake news, God is dead, and you do not have a soul. You are a hackable animal who does not have the capacity for free will. The World Economic Forum has spent decades quietly infiltrating democratically elected governments, penetrating cabinets, and wielding an outsized influence on the world from the corridors of Schwab's Swiss hideout in Davos.
So we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I would know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young noble leaders of the World Economic Forum.
These tyrants have now become arrogant and sure of their own success. They are no longer hiding in the shadows and pulling puppet strings from behind the curtain. According to Schwab, it is his role to shape the transformation of the world in the current period. And unsurprisingly, he admires the Chinese system of state control authoritarianism.
On the G20, you were there meeting some of the leaders as well. Professor Schwab, what do you make of the result? Finally, they put something as a statement, and it seems quite positive with all the voices included.
I think it's positive. It's already positive through the fact that everybody agreed about the statement, which we haven't had the last years. Now the base has been formed, but we have to go one step further. We have to have a strategic mood. We have to construct the world of tomorrow. It's a systemic transformation of the world. So we have to define how the world should look like, which we want to come out of this transformation period. I respect China's achievements, which are tremendous over the last over 40 years. I think it's a role model for many countries.
With world leaders and cabinets firmly under their control, Western democracy has been decimated. Trudeau's Canada has become a wasteland of authoritarian control. Jacinda Ardern's New Zealand is arguably even more tightly controlled by the Davos technocrats. Why should they respect us and our human and constitutional rights if they see us as hackable animals incapable of free thought? Take a look at Brazil for a glimpse of the future. President Bolsonaro's supporters are protesting what they claim to be a wildly unfair and corrupt election. WEF favourite Lula, who hasn't even taken office yet, has already started enacting Klaus Schwab's playbook, freezing the bank accounts of protesters amid a chilling crackdown on freedom of speech and the right to protest peacefully. First Canada, now Brazil. Next, the United States. French billionaire Philippe Agillier claims he has 4 databases that will expose 38 individuals who control the whole world and run the shadow government. Bill Gates, who needs no introduction, is one of those 38 unelected individuals who control the daily lives of 8 billion people. According to Agillier, he can prove the Biden administration takes direct orders from the shadow government.
And altogether, 38 individuals run the daily lives of 8 billion people on Earth. Maria, the shadow government is the entity that is behind most, if not all, elected government that tell them what to do and what not to do based upon geopolitical agreements, most of them anchored in military abroad interventions. That's what the shadow government is. And I can tell you today that the Biden administration is under the control of the shadow government. I can confirm this without any hesitation based upon the information that I have.
If you want a sneak peek of the future under the shadow government, it's worth paying attention to Bill Gates' latest announcement. Gates has a history of playing God. Robert F. Kennedy warned us about this trait in Gates' psychology years ago. According to Kennedy Jr., the World Health Organization is conducting global social and medical experimentation in accordance with the vision of their mega donor, Bill Gates, and his religious faith that he can use technology, vaccines and GMO agriculture to make him the savior of all humanity. Gates' strategy of buying World Health Organization and purchasing control of US health officials like Tony Fauci and Deborah Birx means the Microsoft co-founder can now dictate global health policies affecting 7 billion people and to control the most intimate details of our lives, said Kennedy Jr. on his Instagram page. Just last week, Gates, in his role as false savior, was caught telling world leaders that it's time for death panels to decide who has the right to live and die.
You know, is spending $1 million on that last 3 months of life for that patient, would it be better not to lay off those 10 teachers and to make that trade-off in medical costs? But that's called the death panel, and you're not supposed to have that discussion. So you, of course,
so that's an interesting thing you just said, which is just the last 3 months in life for one person or something, because we haven't had a discussion of how to allocate that money. It means we lay off 3 teachers to do so. I mean, in other words, we haven't had this type of allocation.
We're making that trade-off because of huge medical costs that are not examined to see which ones actually have no benefit whatsoever. And because of pension generosity, we will be laying off over 100,000 teachers, which, you know, I'm very much against that. And the whole AFT will agree with me on that.
Of course, Gates' death panels have everything to do with the globalist elite's obsession with depopulation. This is the brutal, soulless world Gates and the shadow government at the World Economic Forum are determined to roll out as part of their Great Reset. We can't allow their evil religion to become the new normal. Take a look at one of the videos in the description box below for a deeper dive into these plans. Forewarned is forearmed. If you understand the importance of these videos in educating the masses about the shadow government and the evil agenda of the elite, please like these videos and subscribe to our channel to help us continue to produce this content and forewarn as many.
I subbed to that guy. I think you sent me that, Han. I subbed to that guy. Thank you. Now I'll go back. What can I go back to? Like videos. Anything that might be interesting that I lined up. I'll go back to what we're watching then. Hang on. Yeah, that's where I was. Lost books on the bottom.
Who was a disciple of Polycarp who worked with John. So pretty interesting. So anyway, notable points in this thing, we're going to look at this, but there always seems to have been only 4 Gospels, those written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So according to this document, if there is another one, like the Gospel of Paul or the Gospel of Mary or Gospel of Judas, apparently it's fake, because there's always have been and always will be only 4 Gospels. Why? I don't know, but that's just what it says. It also says there's one book of church history, how everything got started, and we call it the Acts of the Apostles, or Acts for short. And it mentions that it mentions 13 of the 14 books written by Paul. That doesn't necessarily mean that the other one is not inspired. We'll get to that in a minute. It also mentions one epistle, a real epistle of Paul.
That was actually pretty stunning what Klaus Schwab said, you know, divine powers and all that. Oh man, that was really stunning.
Written to...
They're really going to enact the one world religion in our lifetimes, guys. We are dead set in the last days. It's absolutely crazy.
Laodiceans. But it also says that there are forged copies, forged epistles, fake ones, to Laodicea and Alexandria. So we have Laodicea and Alexandria. Alexandria is obviously a forgery. Laodicea may or may not be the original one. Seems to be awful small. Remember when we're at the end of Colossians, it says, have this epistle read in the Colossae epistle, Colossians, read in Laodicea, and make sure you guys read the epistle that I sent to Laodicea, so that you understand I'm not telling one person one thing and something else to someone else. It's the same gospel. And so if you can find Laodiceans, again, that's the whole thing. We're not going to add to the canon, but if the canon says there is one, look at it. The one that you find might be one of the fake ones. So you always got to, you know, take it with a grain of salt. It has to agree with the New Testament. So anyway, but there's forged ones. He mentions Luke and at least 2 epistles of John, the Revelation of John. There's also a Revelation of Peter and Paul and stuff like that. They'll get into that. Let's see. And they accept none of the Gnostic books, so they begin to tell you who these are. So let's just look at this. So Matthew and Mark, what they would have said about Matthew and Mark is not there because, again, it's a fragment. The first part and the last part's been ripped off. So he says something about Matthew and Mark because he says the third gospel is that according to Luke. So if we start off saying that there's a third gospel called Luke and a fourth gospel called John, obviously there was Matthew and Mark. Even though we're, so all it says, we're probably talking about Mark, and it says, nevertheless, he was present, and so he placed it in his narrative. So everything is based on eyewitness accounts. Whatever we're talking about, I don't know, but something to do with Mark. So we've had a Matthew and a Mark, then we go to Luke. The third book of the gospel is that according to Luke. Luke, the well-known physician, wrote it in his own name. It is widely believed that he wrote it after the ascension of Christ when he was traveling with the Apostle Paul. Luke had great zeal for making sure all the information was completely correct. It is true that he had not seen the Lord in the flesh. Luke wasn't one of the 12 disciples. Yet, having ascertained the facts, he was able to begin his narrative with the nativity of John. So other places talk about, they talked to Mary, they talked to, anybody that was around at the time and pulled these things together. On a side note, this is interesting. There was a church father called, my mind's blank, I think it was Hegesippus. Yeah, Hegesippus, that wrote a 5-volume commentary to the epistle, to the Gospels. So what he did, according to the church fathers, is he went around and he interviewed Mary, Jesus' mom, his brothers, his sisters, people that were in various synagogues at the time, people that knew him, people, all the eyewitnesses. And in doing that, he wrote this commentary, just lots of extra details. 5-volume commentary on just the 4 Gospels. I would love to get that thing and read it. It would really be an eye-opener, I would think. But it's one of those things that, as far as I know, has been lost to us in history. Okay, so that's Luke. So now John, or the Gospel according to John. Okay, here we go. The fourth gospel is that according to John, who was one of Jesus' disciples. In response to an exhortation of his fellow disciples and bishops, he said, "Fast with me for 3 days, then let us tell each other what should be revealed to each one." So in other words, I'm going to put the basic narrative together, and I want us to fast and pray and see if you remember things. The Holy Spirit, like Jesus said, would bring it to our mind. Maybe I've forgotten an important piece, and let's decide what should be the most important parts and put them together. So he asked the disciples this. The same night it was revealed to Andrew, who was one of the apostles, that it should be John who should relate this in his own name. So that's why we have the gospel according to St. John. They all acting as correctors. So that's cool. So the Gospel of John is not because John went a little kooky, went Gnostic, because it talks about the Logos entering the world and things like that. This was edited by the 12 apostles. So the 12 apostles all agree, yes, this is consistent teaching. Jesus is the Logos, the Word of God. He was with God the Father, and he was God. And he came, all that stuff. So it's got the stamp of approval of all the 12 apostles. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
Let's see here. So John would do it in his own name. They would be correctors. That way, there would be no discord, even though different selections would be given from the facts in individual gospels, and the faith of believers would be secure. You don't want any people saying that there's the John version and the Matthew version, and I'm going to be a Matthewite, and if you're a Johnite, I don't like you, or that kind of thing. We actually see this beginning in the epistles of John with Diotrephes. He wouldn't let John or anybody from John's group even enter his church. Remember that situation. So that's what they're trying to avoid, that kind of stuff. Because in all of them, under one guiding spirit, all these things relating to his nativity, his passion, his resurrection, conversation with his disciples, his twofold advent, the first and the second comings, the first in humiliation, rising from contempt, which took place, and the second in the glory of his kingly power yet to come, should all be declared.
Yeah, good idea, Han.
What marvel it is then that John's bring forth so consistently in his epistles, saying these things, that in person, the things that we have seen with our eyes, heard with our ears, and that our hands have handled, those things we've written. Eyewitness testimony. John professes not only to be an eyewitness, but also a hearer and a narrator of the wonderful things that the Lord did in their order. So that's a fantastic explanation of the Gospel of John. That is just really cool. So then we get to Acts. Remember the things that Benjamite was going to do. Moreover, the Acts of the Apostles was written by Luke, again, not an eyewitness, but studied with that Benjamite guy, in one book for the most excellent Theophilus. Luke wrote about the individual events that took place in his presence. So there's not a whole lot about certain things, like Paul's last missionary journey is not recorded in the book of Acts, or Paul's and Peter's death, not recorded in the book of Acts because Luke was not there. We have that in other documents, again, not to be added to the canon, but it's interesting to have the rest of the story. Anyway, he goes on and he says, the book of Acts, then, he clearly shows that he's only writing things that he was there present by omitting the crucifixion of Peter and the departure of Paul when Paul went from the city of Rome to Spain. That was the final fourth missionary journey, the one that's not recorded in the book of Acts. We have a record of that too, so that's cool. But again, this lets you know that those events that are speculated on actually did happen. But anyway, the book of Acts is
okay. My net might have dropped out. Look. Yeah, net's dropped out. Okay, it's back.
John's bring forth so consistently in his epistles, saying these things that in person, the things that we have seen with our eyes, heard with our ears, and that our hands have handled, those things we've written. Eyewitness testimony. John professes not only to be an eyewitness, but also a hearer and a narrator of the wonderful things that the Lord did in their order. So that's a fantastic explanation of the Gospel of John. That is just really cool. So then we get to Acts. Remember the things that Benjamite was going to do. Moreover, the Acts of the Apostles was written by Luke, again, not an eyewitness, but studied with that Benjamite guy. In one book for the most excellent Theophilus, Luke wrote about the individual events that took place in his presence. So there's not a whole lot about certain things, like Paul's last missionary journey is not recorded in the book of Acts, or Paul's and Peter's death, not recorded in the book of Acts because Luke was not there. We have that in other documents, again, not to be added to the canon, but it's interesting to have the rest of the story. Anyway, he goes on and he says, the book of Acts, then, he clearly shows that he's only writing things that he was there present by omitting the crucifixion of Peter.
Bless your hand, good advice.
And the departure of Paul when Paul went from the city of Rome to Spain. That was the final fourth missionary journey, the one that's not recorded in the book of Acts. We have a record of that too, so that's cool. But again, this lets you know that those events that are speculated on actually did happen. But anyway, the book of Acts is scripture. And then we get to Paul's epistles. So it says, now Paul's epistles, what they are about and to whom they are written is clear to anyone who reads them. You know, like the Romans, it's written to the city of Rome about Roman stuff. Pretty self-explanatory. But first of all, Paul wrote in length, and those are pretty big books, to the Corinthians to correct their heretical system. Then he writes to Galatians to forbid circumcision, forbidding Christians to join the party of the circumcision. We don't want to be Hebrew roots. We want to be Messianic. We want to be Christians. Then after that, he writes to the Romans on the order of the Old Testament scriptures, showing that Christ is their chief matter in them. So it's a witnessing tool to pagan Rome, each of which is necessary for us to discuss, seeing that the blessed apostle Paul himself, following the example of John, writes to no more than 7 churches by name. It's interesting that John wrote to the 7 churches in the book of Revelation, and Paul wrote to 7 churches by name in the following order: Corinthians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Galatians, Thessalonians, and Romans, to those cities, the people in those cities. But he writes twice for the sake of correction to the Corinthians and to the Thessalonians. Okay, it is shown by these 7 epistles that there is one church spread throughout the whole earth. Isn't that cool? We're brothers. I don't care what denomination you are, as long as you accept Jesus and Him crucified. We're brothers. There's one church, one universal church. That's where we get the term Catholic. Catholic means universal. I'm not Roman Catholic in any way, shape, or form. I'm Calvary Chapel. But because of that, I'm Catholic. I'm universal. I believe that we're all brothers and sisters in Christ. You might be sinning, and if I find out, I'll correct you, and we might have an argument. But it doesn't change the fact that you're a believer and I'm a believer, if you really are a believer. So there's a universal church spread throughout the entire earth. Likewise, John also in the Apocalypse writes to 7 churches, and he speaks to us all through them. He wrote out of affection and love, 1 epistle to Philemon, 1 to Titus, and 2 to Timothy. So that's all of those. These are held sacred by the universal church in the regulation of ecclesiastical discipline. So you want to know how a church should work? The epistles of Paul. If your church is not following the epistles of Paul, you're slightly out of line. Now, we can debate on exactly how that should be, but that should be your motivation. If you can say, well, yeah, Paul said we do communion this way, but we're going to do it differently, you're out of line. I don't know if it's important or not, but we're supposed to be running the church the way that the epistles mention. Okay, so now we get to forgeries. He says there are circulating 1 epistle to the Laodiceans and 1 to the Alexandrians, forged in the name of the Apostle Paul against the heresy of Marcion. Remember, we just looked at the Marcion stuff. Let me run back here real quick. Marcion rejects the Old Testament, used a cut-up version of Luke about Jesus not being the creator, cuts up some versions of Paul's epistles. So I can see why Paul might start, doing that kind of stuff. And he creates the Gospel of Paul. Yeah, right. Among these other things. And to study those cults are kind of interesting. But anyway, for our study tonight, so, and I make a note in here that Colossians 4 shows that there's a real epistle to Laodicea also, okay? So there are many others which cannot be received into the universal church, for it's not fitting that gall be mixed with honey. So there's 4 Gospels, there's 1 book of history, the book of Acts, and then there's these 14 epistles of Paul, and then we can debate on some of the others, but that's the nutshell. So if you have another gospel, it's fake. I don't care who wrote it or what it is, or it's fake. Unless it's somebody, like Cassian originally doing a diatessaron. If you're going to make a commentary or make a harmony of the gospels, or it's all based on the 4 gospels. So there's lots of those, and they may or may not have good stuff in them. But there's no other gospels. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and that's it, according to this. Okay, and there's 14 epistles of Paul. There's no gospel of Paul. There's no epistle of Barnabas. Well, there's an epistle of Barnabas. That's later, but there's no gospel of Barnabas. That's a Gnostic word. Things like that. So we've got to be careful. And no matter what it is, even if it's a legitimate book, it's not to be added to this canon. That was the main idea. So general epistles, it says, further, we have an epistle of Jude. So that's legit. That's Jude. 2 bearing the name of John are counted among the general epistles. So I thought that was interesting. I don't know if they just decided 3rd John is just too personal. It's all about Diotrephes and the weird guy. It doesn't say anything about what he did. John just says, I'll correct it when I come. I like having it in our canon, but anyway, so there's at least 2 that are counted among the general epistles, rather. Wisdom, written by the friends of Solomon in his honor. I'm thinking this is a typo, because he could have been talking about the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is closed, and then there's additional books that some of them are really cool, like one is the Wisdom of Solomon. It's mainly all about staying away from idols. So it's all practical good knowledge. So I don't know. I think somebody slipped a digit and wrote this in here. But anyway, it's nice to know that they knew about it and thought it was a good book. But anyway, we received the apocalypses of John and Peter only. However, some do not wish the apocalypse of Peter to be read in church. So that makes me think that Peter's apocalypse got added to or garbled or something. We have an apocalypse of Peter in the Church Father archive, and it seems like, a fake, like the real Laodiceans and fake Laodiceans. Seems like what we have is not legit. But anyway, but we definitely have the apocalypse of John. So early on, everybody accepted the revelation of John. So then we have non-inspired, okay? So Hermas wrote The Shepherd. That's part of one of the apocryphal books, The Shepherd of Hermas. You probably heard of it. But so there's this guy named Hermas who wrote The Shepherd, in the city of Rome, most recently in our times. Well, then it doesn't qualify to be scripture in that sense if it's past the time of the closing. And he wrote this when his brother, Bishop Pius, was occupying the chair at the Church of Rome. So it was a brother of a Roman Catholic, a bishop from Rome. So it indeed ought to be read. It's got some good stuff in it if you want to read that stuff, but that it be made public to the people in church and placed among the prophets whose number is complete, canon's closed, or among the apostles. It's not possible to the end of time, or at least to the end of our age, that kind of thing. Nothing's going to be added to the canons. So this tells us several things. Number one, that they have the canon, the Old and the New Testament, and it's read in public to people in the church, and that there's a list of those books. There's the prophets and the apostles, the basic gospel, and we don't add to them in the sense of teaching them in church. So like at a Calvary Chapel, what we're doing is going Genesis to Revelation, and we kind of start over again. That's the only thing we focus on because that's what we're here for. Now, we might turn around and say, well, now Josephus gives this interesting comment, or Jasher or one of the other texts say this, and if that's true, it might have been like this. So commentaries are fine, but you wouldn't actually stop on a Sunday morning and study the Apocalypse of Peter, even if it was legit. You want to stick to just the books of the Bible, just the 66. So that we're seeing this right here. So the shepherd thing might be a really good treatise. It might have some really good stuff in it, but that we read it in church as a canonical book, no, not going to happen. So, and then we have and I've got other lists of the church fathers. They have different things in here, but the Gnostic cults, and he's going to start talking about the Gnostics now, but we missed some of it. So we reject anything written by Arsenius, Valentinus, or Miltiades. We also reject those who wrote the New Book of Psalms, Marcion, Basilides, and the founder of the Asian Cataphrygians. And, we can study those. Those are all Gnostic cults. We know exactly who they were and what they taught. And as a Christian church, I would reject Mormon theology. I would reject Jehovah's Witness theology. I would reject, Jim Jones, Guyana Temple stuff. There's a lot of cults out there, a lot of them. And I wouldn't want to read anything.
Catholics are the biggest cult of all.
From them because it might get confusing. You don't want to confuse people. We're supposed to be making disciples, and you don't want new believers to get confused. It's easiest to do that. So stick with scriptures is what he's saying. But these are definitely to be rejected because they're cults. I don't have any part of the New Book of Psalms, but I know the guy that wrote it and some of the other things that he wrote. So now, and with that, we'll end with this, but here's just a real quick list. We have Athanasius, who wrote about what should be in the canon in 400. Eusebius did in 325. Hippolytus, Irenaeus, Origen, Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, the Maturanian canon fragment, that's what we just read, talks about what is and is not there. And then you've got old books like the Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, Alexandrinus, and some of the others. And they're all compared here. So the 4 Gospels in all of them, no more than 4 Gospels. 1 book of Acts in all of them. Epistles of Paul, as far as like the not looking at Hebrews, but the other epistles of Paul, they're all there, okay? So the epistle of Philemon is not mentioned by Irenaeus or Hippolytus. They didn't say that it's not supposed to be there. They just said, here's a list of stuff. So they either didn't like it or it just didn't get added to the list. So who knows? But we're looking for someone to say, this is trash. This should not be in the Bible. And nobody says that about Philemon. And the rest of everybody has Philemon. The book of Hebrews, it's not mentioned by Irenaeus, Hippolytus, or Tertullian. I don't know why. It's just not mentioned. They didn't say anything bad about it. but it's mentioned in a lot of the others. Hebrews is not mentioned directly in the Maturanian canon fragment either, that we just read. So we've got the book of James, and you can see here 1st, 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. Some people did not have 3rd John. And again, the canon fragment we just looked at, it didn't say that it's fake. It just says that there's 2, or at least 2 epistles of John. But the 2, everybody agrees on. It's basically what they're saying. And the book of Jude, I think everybody agreed on Jude. Hippolytus didn't mention it, but everybody. Now, Origen and Eusebius, these D's here, they're basically saying there's some people that want to dispute them. And they don't say who. I'm thinking maybe Gnostics. We remember what happened with James. In this case, the book of James. When Luther was putting together his Bible, he said the book of James is a right straw epistle without 1 ounce of gospel in it. He didn't like the idea of works of salvation. And we always get confused on that. But what happened is he's using a Latin Vulgate version of his teachings before he creates his Bible. Now, the Latin Vulgate text that he was using actually comes out and says you're saved by your works. It's kind of like mistranslated when they put it into the Latin. If that's what the true book of James says, I would agree with Luther. It's a right straw epistle without 1 ounce of gospel in it. Get rid of it. But that's one Latin manuscript. All the other manuscripts in Greek, in Georgian, in Coptic, in Syriac, all the other languages, they all say the same thing that our Greek, our basically King James does, that you prove your salvation by your works. You're not saved by works. So it's a misunderstanding. So if Martin Luther can make a mistake like that just because he's looking at one set of manuscripts and not all of them, I could see where he would do that. So I could see other people doing that for James too, possibly 2nd Peter, 2nd, 3rd John, and maybe Jude because of what it's saying. Tertullian says that Jude was written specifically against the Carpocratian Gnostics. So we'll do a study on Jude sometime, but it's pretty interesting. We'll go ahead and stop here with this. I just wanted to do a quick, brief understanding of this. So in other words, the teaching handed down by all the church fathers and the rabbis, we didn't look at it because there's a ton of them, but the teaching is that Moses writes 5 books. He proves himself to be a prophet by all the miracles and things that happen. See, not that he can do anything, but the 10 plagues, the Egyptian Exodus, all that stuff. So the prophets prove themselves by doing something or multiple things, and they add to the canon. And then Ezra, who is a prophet, used of God to bring the children back.
Yeah, I was never here. I completely agree. I'm more friends with you guys than I've got in real life. And I love that. I love that we're all great friends.
After the Babylonian captivity, by inspiration, Holy Spirit closes the canon. And everybody after that accepts the fact that the canon is closed. But he had, there's other temple library things. And then we have prophecies from the Testaments about the Messiah writing stuff when the age of grace occurs. The history will be recorded, and this Benjamite that'll write a series of epistles explaining everything. So you got the Dead Sea Scrolls telling you if you're confused on anything, go read the epistles of Paul. Now today, we argue what Paul actually meant. And so I'm going to tell you, study Paul thoroughly, and then to find the answers on what Paul meant, go back to the scrolls. And then you'll learn what the problems were. Then you can say, well, if that's what the problem was, and that's what he's referring to, then okay, I get it. So that's what we want to do. So basically, there is no lost gospels. There are no lost acts. There are no lost epistles. But we have the ones that are inspired. And anything that says the same thing that they say is redundant. We don't need it. Anything that contradicts what they say is obviously wrong. Anything that gives more information might be useful, like Josephus talking about how the Romans came and how many divisions there were and how they attacked. And some of that might be useful, but it's not super important. So let me stop at this point. I'm going to go through the chat room so we can get questions from YouTube and Facebook. Oh, okay. Michael says, greetings. It's his very first time to be on. Well, I'm glad you're here. Thank you. Yeah, we tend to be growing. We're over 29,000 now on this subscriber count on YouTube, YouTube. And another new person, this is cool. Just discovered your videos in the last 2 weeks, have been watching a ton. I have since bought 4 of your books. Great, I hope you'll like them. Have lots of questions. Okay, well, this is a good place to do it. And then another one, I'm like you, just a few months discovering books, has 8 of them. Well, that's great. Oh, let's see here. Was wondering what you preferred as a way to receive questions. Yeah, you can answer them here. We may not be able to get to them. Another place we can do that is we have problems with email, and so I've just never put the email out. But another place you can follow us is on Telegram. So we should be able to ask questions there. Like tonight, I'm also doing this broadcast on Telegram. So when I get done with this, I'll see if there's any questions, because it does it differently. There's actually audio questions and stuff. But that's our link to our Telegram site. And again, when you go to BibleFacts.org, BibleFacts.org is our there we are. Is our main site. And I think this went off because it normally goes off at 8 o'clock and we're past 8 o'clock, but hopefully everyone that was watching it on the site saw it. But if you go to, down here, we have our Bible Facts News. It's our Telegram channel. So you can click on that and it should show you, you can just do this online too. You can see preview. Okay, so I want to do that. Okay, anyway, because I have Telegram installed, it's wanting to open it. But you should be able to see, like we've got 929 subscribers. So right here on Telegram, you see all the main things. We're talking about what we're doing. And there's a chat channel too, so you can ask questions. So just to let you know. Let's see here.
Okay, he slows down now when he takes answers. I might jump on something else. All right, library. Where is it? No. Hang on.
Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. Tonight I wanted to kind of go over some things we've been doing. We had a PAL conference this weekend. That went very good. And so those videos should be on the church's website on our YouTube channel, actually on the church's YouTube channel. And I'm trying my head mic again, so we'll get to, everybody said it was really good quality, but there was crackly sound. So I'm trying a couple of different things to see how well it works. So what I wanted to share with you today is a couple of different things and some updates and stuff. So I want to take us to the website, and let me refresh this, make sure it's actually working. Yeah, okay, good. So, okay, so anyway, this is normally where we broadcast, and this is our home. So down here, we have several things. Under resources, we've got PDFs, photos, and files. So files right now are basically just things with for eSword and MySword, conversion program to create Bible modules, stuff like that. PDFs is all sorts of stuff. So we've got all of these. So one of the things I wanted to share you first off, under manuscripts, as an example, we've talked about this before. That's the Phaistos disc or script. So these are PDFs, so you can come here and click on them, download them, etc. You run back up to the top here and make sure this is, there we go. So this is something from Linear A, and we've talked about this before, but this is, most of us think it is a pre-flood language or pre-flood document. And we're going to compare a few things I kind of added to this. So I'm working on this. If any of you guys want to work on this with me, you can download this, look at it, see where I'm wrong or whatever, and write your translations. I've got a couple people that are interested. But basically, when I was in not high school, when I was in seminary, one of my professors studied under Cyrus Gordon. Cyrus Gordon was, at that time, probably one of the most leading scholars in Semitic languages. And he believed this to be a pre-flood document or these kinds of things. And so it's really interesting to me. Now today, you're not going to see much about it because a lot of seminaries, a lot of Bible institutions don't believe there was a flood, which is part of the prophecy in 2 Peter. But anyway, so if there was no flood, of course, there can't be a pre-flood language. So it's got to be something else. So Cyrus Gordon actually said that he and his students would be able to read this. So I would just be very interested to see what happens. So this is me putting together modern Hebrew, Paleo-Hebrew, Proto-Hebrew, and then the stuff from the disc. And different languages here. You can look at that later. But basically here is the fonts. Managed to download from one of the universities a font for this and some information. So here is, just to give you, we'll run back here. Here's the front side of the disc, and we've showed you this before. But basically, the way this works is you're starting in the center and you're going around. So in Proto-Hebrew and on back, it can be read left to right, right to left, up to down, circular, or maybe a little bit of all the above. And of course, we would do the same thing also if it was on a door. You might have the title at the door and then down sideways, kind of, A, B, C, D, like this, or like that, or however you want to decorate it. So, but this is interesting. So what happens here is you notice these lines. Hopefully you can see that. So right in here. Let me, my wife is saying that our lights are kind of up. Let me change something here. There, maybe that's a little better. I'm glad we can do that on the fly. But basically, the way this works is these are symbols. So this would probably be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 letters. And then you'll notice a line. So between here, this is basically like a paragraph. So here would be 1 word, 2 word, 3rd word, 4th word, 5th word, and it just wraps around like that. But it's interesting to see each word is kind of in its own box. So you know when the word stops. Very interesting way of doing it. You can tell these are stamped. And so that's the front side of the disc. And here's the back side, and the same kind of stuff. So this first word here is 2 letters, whatever those letters are. Letters, sounds, hieroglyphs, something like that. And here's the second word. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 letters long. And so it just wraps around like that. So in here, what I've done is for the front and the back side, these are it's a little easier for us to read in English, So here's the stuff and here's what the translation might be. So it's something that we can work on. But what I wanted to show you here is this is an article. Someone sent me this about last month. This is from Halley's Bible Handbook, the 1965 edition. So in the 1965 edition, it probably isn't there in a modern Halley's Handbook, but it's talking about writing and stuff. And there's a whole section here of the antediluvian writing. So let me see if I can bring this up a little bit more so we can see it easier. A little fuzzy, but stuff about the pre-flood writing, and of course the old legends that it started with Enoch. So there's an Enochian language, and it goes on pre-flood. And here's several people that found things at Cush. And notice this. This is, and we'll get a better picture of this, but same thing. You've got a tablet here, and you've got lines separating words. And here's some other examples of other things. And so it's interesting to me to see that Halley's Handbook, at least the 1965 edition, identified these as pre-flood tablets. And if you think about it, if you look at the basic chronology from Genesis, using the Hebrew Masoretic text, not the Septuagint, the flood would have been about 2200 BC, more or less. Abraham is in the 1900s BC. So the fall of the Tower of Babel, the language changing, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 to 1900 BC. So if this is a pre-flood language, it doesn't have to be older than, say, 1900 BC. That's if you use the other writing. The other chronology. So let me just go down here. Here is a better picture of that. And what I wanted to share with you, it's a little fuzzy, but it's not bad. But notice this, you've got two lines here and then single lines here. So this is kind of making it a dividing line, so to speak, between sentences or paragraphs or whatever this is. So in this case, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 symbols. This looks like a house on a boat. Maybe this part didn't get pushed down good enough. And these are imprints. And then that to me looks like a stick of dynamite and a hand, another stick of dynamite, things like that. I'm sure it's not dynamite, but here's something at a right angle. So all these things are similar, and the different head with the hairstyle. It's the same kind of thing that we see. So I wanted to compare something and show you one other thing. Here is, I could probably do this here. This is, let me just show you this. I think I have it. BibleandScience.com is a pretty cool place that does a lot of recreations, replicas of different things from all different time periods, anything remotely connected with the Bible. And so I've got this from them. You probably can't see this too well, but this is a replica of, and that's what the picture is there. But this is, see if we can do this here, a replica of a bulla. And so what that is I like, anybody that's a king or a prophet or whomever will have a ring, which is his authority. So on your finger, you're going to have a ring that you could use to stamp in either wax or clay or whatever the case may be. So you can see here, this is the actual size of the ring. And compared to my finger, you can kind of see it would be about the size of a ring. And this is a much larger recreation. So, but this is the a bulla of the prophet Isaiah. Wanted to share that with you guys. So I've shared that before on here, but I just wanted you to notice something here. Now, looking at this, get out your Paleo Hebrew dictionaries now. But you'll notice this is Isaiah, and you'll notice this is Navi or prophet. But notice this. Here's a double line, and here's a double line, and a double line, and it looks like probably there would be one more up here because this should be roughly this big, I think. So, but this is interesting to me. So this probably said something like by the authority of Isaiah the prophet. So this tells us a couple of things. Number one, when Isaiah was alive, he had authority like a high-ranking official. So people would know that it's Isaiah or it's the king or whomever. And if something is sealed, you don't dare open it unless it's to you. That would be like a heavy fine, imprisonment, or something like that. So it's interesting to see that while he was alive, he had quite a bit of authority. And of course, we know what happened. Paul mentions this in Hebrews 11, that Isaiah the prophet was put to death by Manasseh. He was actually ordered to be put inside of a hollow log and then sawn in half. So we've got other records about that too. But so the evil kings can do whatever they wish, but it's interesting to see this. Don't you wish that our Congress and president would be going about their business of taking care of the nation, and a real prophet would step in and say, you're going a little too far with this. Go back the other way. And that they would say, okay, and go back to a biblical standard. Wouldn't that be interesting? Just think back in this time how it would be to know Isaiah the prophet, and that's a real prophet, and you don't mess with Elijah or Isaiah. And of course, there's evil people in government that would still try to kill them. But I wanted to share this with you, mainly this concept here of the double lines and then the single lines. So I just thought those were really interesting. So again, the double lines and the single lines. And we get back to, there's a couple of examples here from the Halley's Bible. But going back to here, we have, let's do this. Same kind of a thing. So these are single lines. So like this is one sentence just kind of curling around. So very interesting to see that. So I wanted to kind of point that out to you. So this is a PDF, and this is one you guys probably have had for a while. But just to know that we have, we've added the article here from the Halley's Bible Encyclopedia, and then the bullet from the prophet Isaiah, just to see how the same kind of things work. Because the basic idea is the original language should be very, very similar to Hebrew, some sort of Semitic language. And so that was why Cyrus Gordon said it's actually not that hard. If you look at something like this or something like this, and you don't know if it's Chinese, Japanese, English, what language it is, how it works, you'll be lucky or blessed if you can translate this in 100 years. I mean, there's too many variables. You probably will never be able to figure it out. On the other hand, if you know that it's based on English or Hebrew or something like that, all of a sudden patterns emerge. And I can see certain patterns in here. For instance, a lot of these words end with a head. So if that's a woman's headdress, like right here, if that's a woman, in Hebrew, the word H is tacked onto a word to make it feminine. So we can already begin to see some patterns. Don't know if that's what that means or not, but just that kind of thing. Yeah. So this is an example of that kind of thing. So I'll back out of this. This is just under manuscripts, under our PDFs. So what I'm doing, we're trying to redo the website. We're trying to get to a place where we use YouTube, and if there's anything sensitive, we can use something else. Just always know to go to BibleFacts.org, and we shouldn't have a problem if I was to get dropped off of YouTube or Facebook or something. But what we're trying to do here, we've got Canon studies, Dead Sea Scroll studies, herbal medicine studies. Those are the big ones. These are our playlists on the website, and then playlists from YouTube and other places. But down here, there's the Bible Facts app, and I know several of you have that. So this is from Subsplash. So if you're on Apple or Google Play, Amazon Fire, or on Roku. So we're on all of those. Several of you guys are watching it from there. So we've got that, and we have our Telegram channel, which is right here. So if you go to our Telegram channel, it's wanting to open in Telegram. Right now we've got 1,482 subscribers. And so that's just the things that we're doing, kind of a news type thing that we're trying to work on. So those are good things to look at. Follow us on our Facebook page. We broadcast to YouTube. I do have a Rumble and an Odyssey channel, and these two actually pull from YouTube. So tonight's teaching will go out, and then tomorrow or the next day will just show up on those. So those are things we're doing just to kind of keep things. But going back to our resources with the PDFs, I wanted to show you something else. Under photos, we have several things like the disc photos. These are just the photos themselves. So if you guys didn't want that PDF, but you just wanted pictures of the disc, for instance, you could come here and print those out. So those are nice. And backing up from here, we've got, and we've seen this before, this is stuff from the altar of Joshua. So here's actually the altar of Joshua. And let's see, how do we get out of here? Back up here. Okay, there we go. And other things, like here is the picture of the curse tablet that was found. And then we come back and, for instance, here's the Proto-Hebrew of the language on that. So you guys know that this is here, but I wanted to remind you that we have the photos and stuff. I'm going to try to add more and more photos and things like that. So if you want the PDFs, you can get them. If you're just interested in the photos, you could get those. So I just added this one today here, prophecy charts. And so I wanted to add a few of these. And I thought I would just go back over some of these prophecies briefly. And so what we've done is made these PDFs. So you could click on them, put them on your phone, your tablets, your PCs, print them off, whatever you want to do. And so these are things, these will be in books in the future, but it's just nice to have the charts. So just to kind of go over this, here's a picture. As you can tell, it's right now it's on page 20 of a book I'm working on. But the Metal Empires of Daniel. And let me see if I can bump this up a little bit. Oh, it's good, I think. So in here, most of you are familiar with Daniel chapter 2. And in Daniel chapter 2, it's got a statue that Nebuchadnezzar sees, which is a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, feet of iron and clay. And these are things that different people wonder about, but the early church fathers explained it, and Daniel itself explains it. So for instance, when Nebuchadnezzar is asking, what does this mean? In chapter 2, verse 38 of Daniel, Daniel says that Nebuchadnezzar, that he is the head of gold. Now, when he says that, it's either he, meaning Nebuchadnezzar, so the next one might be his son, or he, Nebuchadnezzar, as in Babylon. So the next one is an empire, another empire. So when he gets down to it, he basically just tells Nebuchadnezzar that after him, other empires will come. And these are explained later because Daniel prays to the Lord to get more information, and the Lord gives him a lot more information of certain pieces of it as far as the timing and things in his time period. So he sees this chest and arms of silver, and that represents the Persian Empire. And we're told that in Daniel 5, verses 30 and 31. So after the fall of the Babylonian Empire, the Medes and the Persians will come. And of course, Daniel is saying this, but also in Isaiah, it talks about the Persians coming and destroying the Babylonians after 4 generations. So it's Nebuchadnezzar, or 3 generations, Nebuchadnezzar, his son, in the days of his grandson, the empire ends. And he mentions that it's Persians, okay? So after that, there's this other empire, and in Daniel 8, verses 20 to 22, we're told that the Persian Empire falls, the Prince of Persia falls to the Prince of Greece. And so that's what happens. And we see later on in history that that's exactly what happened. These aren't necessarily empires that take over the whole world, but they take over a large part of the world, creating an empire, and either seek to destroy or do something of Israel, or Israel's caught in the middle of these things. So this is what happens. And then it comes out to the legs of iron, okay? And so in Daniel 11:30, it mentions that this Grecian kingdom, Daniel 11 gives you all the details of all the Greeks and how they divided and what they did. And they fall to the ships of Kittim. And Kittim is a Hebrew word for Rome. In some documents, it referred to Cyprus at one point, but there was no Cyprus Empire, there was a Roman Empire. So we understand this for Rome. And then in 395, Rome divided into 2 pieces, and that's why we have the 2 legs, the east and the west. So this is the Western Roman Catholic Latin side of the empire, and this is the Eastern Orthodox or Greek Orthodox Greek side of the empire, or Rome and Byzantium, Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire. And so this continues. So supposedly these things continue until we have the feet and the toes made partially out of clay and partially out of iron. And that's something that's coming in the near future. And just ignore the red stuff. This is me speculating in the book, and so it's not finished yet. But most of us understand that, and this is a good chart to have, just so we understand this with the pieces of Daniel defining what those mean. And so some of the questions, of course, that we would ask is, Babylon actually fell to the Medes and Persians. Persia actually, Medes and Persians, actually fell to the Greeks, and the Greeks actually fell to the Romans. Well, then the Roman Empire should fall to this feet and toes of iron and clay. Well, if Rome fell in 476, where was the feet and toes of iron and clay? And then we realize that the Western division fell, but the Eastern one did not. It didn't fall until 1453, 1,000 years later. Well, that's a little better, but why didn't these things show up in 1453 BC? And so that's because the empire proper has not yet fallen, either in 476 or 1453. And these are the things we go through, and we'll paint a clear picture later on. So this is continuing to go on, and the empire keeps trying to reconstitute, and it still has not finished yet. Or we would have these. So those may come in the very near future, but those are questions to ask of what was going on in the Middle Ages. So this is an interesting prophecy, because in the days of these kings is when Messiah comes and creates an empire that never ceases to exist. We know that to be the tribulation period. So let me back out of this. So that's just one of our prophecy charts. And let me explain, here's another prophecy chart, since we're talking about that. This is from the, and let me run it down just a little so we can see it good. This is from the Testament of Noah. So it's a Dead Sea Scroll. According to this Dead Sea Scroll, Noah has a vision from God. And in the vision, we have a olive tree, which always represents the eternal plant that the Lord would plant. So it starts with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then it becomes the nation of Israel. And eventually it becomes the Messiah itself, and the Messiah creates the church. So this whole thing is the plant. All these other trees are just trees. So they just represent Gentile nations. So all nations, nothing wrong with the nations, they're just Gentile nations or just nations. And then there's this special group called the Jewish nation. And that's always in their symbolism. But in his dream, he sees metal mountains come up and try to destroy multiple trees and try to destroy the sacred plant that God planted. And these represents empires. And as you can see, we have lead and clay. And then we have gold, silver, copper, and iron. Well, the gold, silver, copper, and iron, of course, look identical to this statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw. Gold, silver, it says bronze or brass, but it's a copper alloy, and then iron, and then we got clay. So you can see Daniel, if he knows the testaments of the patriarchs, Nebuchadnezzar sees this dream, and his first thought's going to be, who told you our secret stuff? And then he's going to realize, no one. Well, if no one told him, this is a little too coincidental. This is a dream from God to Nebuchadnezzar. So I better, interpret it right. At least tell him this part here and focus in on that you need to repent. And then hopefully learn more about these later, which Daniel does. But so going back and looking at this is pretty interesting, because gold, silver, copper, and iron, we would kind of see this. And this doesn't only occur in the Testament of Noah. It also occurs in Enoch, and I believe the Ezra Apocalypse, if there's a couple of others. But notice we start with lead, clay, whoever those were, and then these. And remember in Revelation, it talks about there are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. But the other one morphs into even an 8th. So that's the thing that we have. So if we have gold, silver, copper, and iron is the Roman Empire, and we have 5 that are fallen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the one that is, and the other is not yet come, but when it does come, it is even an 8th. So we can see that Revelation and Daniel give us the most important parts that we need to know. But stuff that was already old in Daniel's day, he knew about, but we didn't. So where is this extra lead coming from? What is a lead kingdom? What is a clay kingdom? So if it's partially iron and partially clay, what kingdoms are these? Well, this is obviously Rome. And this one, if it's the same, is probably Egypt. And this one is probably Babylon. But that's speculation at this part. So these are just some of the pictures that we're doing. And we want to pull these up because as many times as you and I have studied Daniel, we see this picture and go, got it. And sometimes you'll run into cults that want to argue. They'll say, well, no, this actually represents, like the bear. This is the winged lion in Daniel's other dream, and the bear and the leopard. And they'll try to say, well, the winged lion is eagle wings, United States. Bear is Russia. And they'll try to make it into something modern. Well, if it was modern, then a bear would be Russia, and an eagle would be United States, a lion would be Great Britain, if it was modern. But Daniel defines it himself, so we're really clear on that. There's no reason to get confused. So one of the other ones I put in here, and then we'll just stop at this point, and I'll see if there's questions in the chat room. Well, what's interesting is in the Testament of Noah.
Oh man, hang on.
Thing is in the Testament of Noah, Noah gets this vision. And so obviously from the beginning of time, we have these 8 empires that try to attract and destroy the seed of God. So from Noah through Shem, through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Israel, and then the Messiah, things like that. So who are these? The other part of this vision, though, is interesting. God says this, and basically, why bother telling Noah any of this stuff? He'll never live long enough to see it. He begins to explain, you need to deal with this, and you need to deal with it now, because this is beginning to develop, and it's really important. So the other part of the vision is this, and he sees the flood, and the flood receding, and the earth is just, a muddy place. It hasn't really developed much yet. And it kind of forms, and in the center of where he's looking is this large mountain. On the top of the mountain, there's a tree. Well, obviously, the tree is the first empire, so post-flood, that would be Noah. Adam ruled the planet and lost control. Noah ruled the planet and lost control. And the Messiah will rule the planet and not lose control. So there's only 3 kings of the entire earth, or what we would call King of Kings. A king or a lord over all the kings, all the individual countries. So he sees this and he's looking at this, and there's the tree kind of separates, and there's 3 branches. So there's a top one, a middle one, and a lower one. And so you can kind of guess where we're going with this. If this is Noah and the kingdom, this would be Ham, Shem, and Japheth. You would think Shem is the top, Japheth in the middle, Ham lower. Not in order of birth, because Shem was godly. The lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will come through him. Ham caused a lot of problems, and Japheth was just Japheth. So just the nations. But it's interesting, he's watching this, and he sees 2 branches break off of the bottom one. And these 2 branches come up to the top, and they attack the top branch from opposite sides. And they have real evil faces in them. So let me try to blow this up a little bit. So, and this, of course, is why we did this. And so when you pull everything together, the explanation, the dream is that 2 sons or grandkids, someone from Ham's lineage, will come up and try to attack and take Shem's land. Well, we know on the coast we have Canaan, came up and founded Zidon and then Tyre and came on down. On the other side, we had Nimrod, who started with a battle with Japheth and then spread in. Eventually, these two people came together to form the one harlot religious system, the one world empire. And it lasted up to the end of the first age. And it's interesting because Nimrod is a perfect example of an antichrist. And his false prophet was a guy named Anuki, who did a lot of things along the same lines, causing people to worship him and that kind of stuff. So it's interesting for us to see this. So if we take this back, we can kind of see now that this first empire is obviously Babylon. Not the Babylon that we think of, but it's Nimrod and Canaan, actually, I should say. Their Babylonian Canaanite empire. So if this goes forward, we could probably see that this is Egypt, because these guys tried to attack Abraham and then Isaac and then Jacob. And then Jacob's family went into Egypt. They were in slavery and had to escape with an exodus. So this empire had to be destroyed. In each one of these empires, it's interesting how it's in two pieces. This one is Nimrod, Babylon, or Nimrod and Canaan. And there's some other ways that it breaks up. But this is Upper and Lower Egypt. This would be the Assyrian Babylonian group. And this would be the Medo-Persians. And this would be Greece. Of course, it splits into the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic empires, the Syrian and the Egyptian. So these two. And then, of course, we have Rome with its east and west legs. So then we have lead, and then we have clay. Well, assumingly, clay might have something to do with Egypt. So we're probably assuming that Egypt is one of the 10 nations. One of the church fathers actually says that. So again, I'm speculating, so it may or may not be, but we're putting this together. So what would be this mysterious lead that Daniel didn't see if we're talking about iron and clay being mingled together at the end? Well, when we look at Zechariah chapter 3, we have the picture, and I didn't put that one up. I'm just beginning to get a good picture of it. So anybody wants to help with graphics is good too. But anyway, in Zechariah 3, we have the entire thing of a woman, which is wickedness, which would be a wicked religious system, being put in an ephah basket. Now, ephah is a term from a unit of weight, bushel basket type weight from Egypt, but it's sealed with a lead lid. So this is a lead lid. And then two stork women with stork wings, take her to Shinar, which is another word for Babylon, and put her there until she can come forth to do whatever it is she does. But they set her there in her own house or her own temple. So lead represents what we would consider the mystery Babylonian Empire, which makes sense that would be right before the 10 nations or at the same time period. So it's interesting to see these things. And again, the Dead Sea Scrolls are giving us more information. They're not telling us anything we didn't know. Actually, they are a little bit, but they're not contradicting anything. So when we look at Daniel, gold, silver, copper, iron, and clay, and then we look at Revelation that told us that 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come, we realize we're missing these 2. Now, if we're in Daniel's time period, maybe we don't even need to bother knowing about these, but still, it helps us to understand. So the book of Revelation is expecting us to know this. I thought that was interesting. And then this little clue into other things. So we'll go ahead. We're going to continue adding these, but I wanted to share you, these are the prophecy charts that we'll be adding as we go and as we teach. And again, backing up to here, we have the, oh, I made it too big. That's what's going on. There we go. Something like that. So, so this is our regular home site, Bible Facts. So in here we have PDFs, photos, and files. So again, PDFs would be if we had that kind of stuff. This is the manuscript one. This is where we saw the disc. And so we'll see all those kind of things. We're trying to get it organized where it's really good. Here's our canon studies, our Dead Sea Scroll studies. And again, we come here, there's all these different things we can look at, different translations and links to like the digital library in Israel and other things like that. So just wanted to let you know that. So this is the thing we're trying to continue to do with BibleFacts.org. And then of course we have our bookstore. So any books that we have these just point you to Amazon, and this is how we fund.
Guys, I might switch to his thing on Enoch. This is a bit slow. Enoch's fallen angels. Let's see what he says about Enoch's fallen angels.
Having a little bit of a problem. I was trying to do Telegram also, but it didn't want to do it. So that's kind of something we're testing out. So let's see. Another thing I wanted to mention is that I am trying a different microphone. So I've got these bone conduction headphones with a microphone built in. So just let me know if it sounds strange or if everything seems to be good. Everything else is the same, the camera and everything. So today what I want to talk to you about, just a couple of thoughts, some things I was going through. And so first let's look at Genesis, pull it up here, chapter 4. And in Genesis chapter 4, we have the story of Cain killing Abel. So we understand that well. And I want to start at the end of this and kind of go through it and just kind of paint a picture to some things. Connect this to Jasher and good, they're saying the sound's good. With Jasher and Enoch, and then kind of pull some other things in. So in this case, we have Genesis chapter 4, starting in verse 13. It says that Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. So Cain has killed Abel. God has went and talked with him, and he's been kicked out of the land. He has to go to Nod and live, which is east of Eden, or a place that will become known as Nod, east of Eden. And Cain says to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me out this day from the face of the earth. From your face I shall be hid. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that everyone who finds me will slay me. So let me get out of that here real quick. And let's see. Verse 15, the Lord said to him, therefore, whoever slays Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. So in this particular case, Cain saying that I killed Abel, I killed him, I'm a murderer, I did it on purpose, I was angry. But people will find me and want to kill the murderer. And so he puts this concept on him. So if anyone kills Cain, he gets 7 times the punishment. So it's a protection for Cain. Cain is firstborn of Adam. Cain's going to have a lot of children. He has time to repent if he does. And of course, we know he doesn't. So it says, Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, east of Eden. People ask a lot of times where the land of Nod is and how come it was already named at this point. This is Moses writing in 2400 AM, so 2400 and some years after this event happened. And what became the land of Nod is where he went and colonized. It's on the eastern side of Eden. So wherever Eden's at, he goes east, and that's the land. And then it says, Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city after his son Enoch. Now, this is not the Enoch that writes the book of Enoch or the prophet. This is a different Enoch. Now, what's interesting, a lot of people say, well, where did Cain get his wife? According to the ancient histories, it was his sister. Her name was Awen. So basically, in the first generations, you only have brothers and sisters to do that kind of stuff. Later on, you can go to cousins and on down like that.
You beat me to it,
So
Dolly.
Adam and Eve are the first two and the only two people. They have a series of sons and daughters, and then that generation has sons and daughters, and it goes on from there.
So Enoch, we're going to look at the genealogy of Enoch, because that's rarely looked at. We almost always just look at the genealogy of Seth and go down to Noah. Let's see here. So it says that to Enoch was born Irad. To Irad, Methuselah. Methuselah begot Methusiel. These are all names very similar to the Seth lineage. And Methuselah begot Lamech. Now there is a Lamech, or Lamech, that is Noah's dad. And this is a different one. So you've got two genealogies. Sometimes the names are very similar. There are two Namas. One is someone from Cain's lineage, who was not a very good person. Canaanites generally, or Cainites rather, generally were not. The other one became Noah's wife. So Noah's wife was his great aunt, I think, at that time, on back. So Nama and Noah get married. This is a different Nama. Lamech has Noah. It's Noah's father. This is a different Lamech. And then there's Methuselah, which is Enoch's son, and that's different from this person. So it says Lamech had two wives. The two wives, the name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah. And it says, to Ada bare Jabal, who was the father of all that dwell in tents, and such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all that such that handle the harp and the organ. Zillah bare Tubal-Cain, the instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. Notice the very beginning here, we have iron. We'll get back to that in a second. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Nama. So again, this Nama is not Noah's wife. It's a different one. So, and it goes down, and then there's some things that happen. So at this point, I want to stop and just kind of look at a little bit of this. And it's an interesting thing to look at. We have, starting with Cain, and then we have generation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just named. And then we kind of stop, and we're talking about Jubal and Zillah and Nama and Tubal-Cain. So there's something special about these people that it's not recorded in Genesis. So we wanted to kind of look at that. So let's stop there for a second. And what we'll do is go to the book of Jasher. So here is the section about Cain and Tubal-Cain. So this is one of the things that we'll see in a little bit. It says when Canaan, now we have Adam, and on the godly side, we have Adam who has Seth, who has Canaan. So this is a good Canaan. So Cain and Abel, Cain kills Abel, Cain is exiled. So now Adam kind of starts over, Seth, and then Canaan. When Canaan was 70 years old, he begot 3 sons and 2 daughters. Not that it was quintuplets or anything, but that's when he started having children. The names of the children were, the firstborn was Mahalalel, and we see that in Genesis also, Cain and Mahalalel goes on down. But the second was Enan, the third was Mered, and his sisters were Ada and Zillah. So that's kind of important. So we get to see there's a little bit of crossing of the two lines, the Sethites and the Canaanites. So these are the 5 children of Canaan that were born to him. Lamech, the son of Methuselah, became related to Canaan by marriage when he took the 2 daughters for his wives. So we've got Adam, Seth, Canaan. Canaan's 2 daughters were, or 2 of his daughters, were Ada and Zillah. Now, Lamech on Cain's side then is going to take those 2. Let me check real quick here and see if there's a. Okay, just want to make sure there was no problem with anything. And let's see here. So Lamech became married to Canaan, or married Ada and Zillah. Okay, so Ada conceived and bare a son to Lamech, whose name was Jabal. We just saw that in Genesis. Zillah, her sister, was barren in those days and had no offspring. This is interesting history behind the scenes. And today we have such a thing as abortion. And no matter how you have an abortion, if you keep getting pregnant and keep aborting it, you get to a place where it's extremely hard for your body to carry a baby full term. it almost makes you barren because you keep having, you'll start having miscarriages almost naturally. And so this is the very first time this kind of thing started. So in those days, it says Zillah was barren because in those days the sons of men began to trespass against God and trespassed against his commandments, which he had commanded Adam, namely to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. Some of the sons of men caused their wives to drink a draught that would render them barren, in order that they may retain their figures and thereby their beautiful appearance may not fade. And the sons of men caused, when the sons of men caused some of their wives to drink, Zillah drank with them. And the childbearing women appeared abominable in the sight of the husbands as widows, while their husbands lived. For the barren ones only, to the barren ones only were they attracted. So this is a really good example of the very first herbal medicine being used to kill. And again, we understand from the church fathers and everything that abortion is sin, it's murder. And so I'm very happy to hear Roe v. Wade has been overturned. And I'm hoping Kansas, among all other states, will go ahead and pass the amendment and have abortion illegal here also. So that's coming up, by the way. We need to vote for that in August, so just a week or so away. And there is early voting if you live in Kansas. So anyway, at the end of days and years, so sometime later on in years, Zillah became old, and the Lord opened her womb. And let's see here. Let me just make sure that I get out of here. There we go. So I was trying to do Telegram also, and they're wondering what happened. Let's see. So it says that the Lord opened her womb. She conceived and bare a son who called his name Tubal-Cain, saying, I have withered away, but I have obtained him from Almighty God. She conceived again and bore a daughter whose name was Naamah. And again, this is not the Naamah that was Noah's wife, but the other one. For she said, after I had withered away, I have obtained pleasure and delight. And Lamech was old and advanced in years, and his eyes were dim. So this is the situation. So he's got these two wives. One's barren, one's not. And again, this looks weird, and people say this is the first polygamy, but the way this has always been from the days of old is that it's one man for one woman for life. Okay, is everybody getting sound? Somebody said that there was no sound. Testing 1, 2, 3.
The sound.
Yeah, it looks like sound's going out. Just wanted to double check. My wife said there was no sound up there. Okay. Let me check real quick too, just to make sure. Oh, wait, here we go.
Okay.
Let me check real quick, just
Come
to make
on,
sure.
stop stalling.
We've got 283 people watching.
Yeah.
So it looks like
Plus 4 more here.
Just going to check real quick. Okay, looks like I've got sound going. Okay. Just if you don't hear anything, just refresh, I guess. Sounds like the sound's doing good. Let's see here. Thank you for checking that stuff too, by the way, everybody. Joseph said loud and clear, hearing you. Okay, great. Okay. So in this case, this is the part. Oh, let's flip back to Genesis. So let's see here. So Cain had Lamech. Lamech took two wives, Adah and Zillah. Oh, and basically what I was saying is that the old way of doing this is that you're supposed to have a firstborn child to carry on the lineage. So it's supposed to be one man for one woman for life. And the way that the exception is that, of course, if your wife dies, you have no kids, you're supposed to take another wife. But if you have a wife, you try to have kids and it doesn't work, then you take a second wife just to make sure you can have an heir, a firstborn son. If neither one of them can get pregnant, it's not them, it's you. And so there's no sense of going any further. So that's been the case all the way through. We see Abraham doing the same thing. So it's not necessarily that he did anything wrong, because we've already seen that Zillah was barren. We don't know a whole story for that one, but that's basically the way the ancients used to do things. So it says that Lamech took 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada and the other was Zillah. And let me just jump up here. Ada bare Jubal, the father dwell in tents and all that have cattle. His brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all those that handle the harp and the organ. So music. Zillah also bare Tubal-Cain, the instructor of every artificer in brass and iron, and his sister was Naamah. Now Lamech said to his 2 wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken to my speech, for I have slain a man to my hurt, or to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain will be avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech will be avenged 7-fold. Because he didn't do it in anger, it was an accident, which we'll see here in a little bit. And then it goes on and says Adam knew his wife again, and then they have Seth, and then Seth goes to Enos, and then those things. So this particular thing here, people look at this and say, what in the world is the story about this? Well, it finishes up in here by saying that, and here it starts in verse 26. So this part right here. It says, Lamech was old and advanced in years. His eyes were dim that he could not see. And Tubal-Cain, his son, was with him. Tubal-Cain was young, but not like a child, just a young man. And remember, back in these days, when you lived to be 600, 700, 800 years old, a young man may be a few hundred years old. So his son Tubal-Cain was leading him. One day Lamech went to the field, and Tubal-Cain, his son, was with him. While they were walking in the field, Cain, the son of Adam, advanced towards them. For Lamech was very old and could not see much. So Tubal-Cain, his son, was still young. And Tubal-Cain told his father to draw the bow, and shot arrows and smote Cain, who was yet afar off, and he slew him, for he appeared to them, both of them, to be an animal. So it was a hunting accident. The arrows entered Cain's body, and though he was distant from them, he fell to the ground and died. And the Lord requited Cain's evil according to his wickedness, which he had done to his brother Abel, according to the word of the Lord which he had spoken. And it came to pass that when Cain died, Lamech and Tubal went to see the animal that they had slain, and they saw, and behold, Cain, their grandfather, was fallen dead upon the earth. Wow. And Lamech was very much grieved at having done this. Clapping his hands together, he struck his son and caused his death. So somehow he struck him, they fell over, and so 2 people died that day. Now, the wives of Lamech heard what Lamech had done, and they sought to kill him. So they thought he was a murderer. So the wives of Lamech hated him from that day forward, because he slew Cain and Tubal-Cain. The wives of Lamech separated from him and would not hearken to him in those days. Lamech came to his 2 wives and pressed them to listen to him about the matter. And he said to his 2 wives, Ada and Zillah, to hear my voice, wives of Lamech, attend to my words. For now you have imagined and said that I slew a man with my words, and a child with my stripes, for having done me no violence. But surely I am old and gray-haired, my eyes are heavy through age. And I did this thing unknowingly. A hunting accident is not something you execute someone for. And the wives of Lamech listened to him in this matter. They returned to him with the advice of their father Adam, and but they bore no more children for him from that time forward. And it goes on with this. So this is the basic story behind that particular thing. Now, when we go back to Scripture, again, we have this whole situation going here with him being avenged. Now, the interesting thing about this is this is an incident that happened. Obviously, when Cain died, this was many, many years or maybe even a few centuries after Ada and Zillah had kids. So one of the questions is, why do we have a direct lineage down here? And then we stop and let everyone know that there was Tubal-Cain, there was Naamah, there was Jubal, and there was Jabal, and the specific things. It almost sounds like Jabal invented tents, okay? And Jubal invented the harp and the organ. And Tubal-Cain invented how to take the metal from the ground and make weapons. And so all of this stuff is really interesting. So with this in mind, the question is, it would be interesting that everybody didn't know anything, and all of a sudden one family out of the blue has a bunch of children that are geniuses, and they invent everything.
Yep.
So let's, with that in mind, let's go to the book of Enoch. So in the book of Enoch, we have the story of the Watchers, the giants, and the 200 angels that fell. So basically, we have the story that's given that Azazel is an angel. He came to earth specifically to like recreate things in his own image. He took a wife, he started doing genetic experiments, kind of kept to himself, didn't change much, nothing really happened, except over in his area, wherever he was at. So this led an angel by the name of Shemyaza and 200 other angels to come down to do the exact same thing. They really messed up bad. And so the whole sin was placed on Azazel. And there's a whole history behind all that. But so here's the situation. In chapter 6, we have the descent of the 200s. This is in the book of Enoch, chapter 6 to 16 is all of the Nephilim history, the Nephilim clans, the Civil War, how all that stuff happened. But I just wanted to look at a couple of things. So the leaders, the main leader here is Shemyaza, and then several of the others. So when we get down to 7, I want to look at 7 and 8 and look at them specifically. Excuse me. So each of the 200, each of the angels that came down, and so there's Azazel, he's off doing his own thing, and these are the 200. Each one chose a wife for himself and began to go to them, mate with them, and they taught them sorcery and enchantments, the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. The women became pregnant and gave birth to great giants. So what I want to show you here is interesting is, so they come to earth, they take their wives, and of course you want your wives and your children to have superior weapons, to have the superior food, to have a better way of protecting themselves. You want them to be successful above all others. But since we're talking about sorcery and enchantments, and then the cutting of roots and being acquainted with plants. So I want to draw your attention to this. First, I want to ask the question, why is cutting of roots and plants, whether you're making dye for paint, for makeup, some sort of herbal medicine, or whatever it is you're doing with it, making glue, why would that be a big deal? And of course, it wouldn't. So keep that in mind, but somehow they make it into a big deal. So then they have their kids. And when we get down to chapter 8, we have the forbidden teachings. So Azazel, that was the first angel that came down, taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and armor from the metals of the earth. Now in Genesis, we have the first human being, or at least the first descendant of Cain, to make metal and armor and swords and things out of metal. Was Tubal-Cain. So there's got to be a connection here. So we're going to see here, it was in the days of Jared that these angels descended. So Jared is Enoch's father. And there's a lot of history about him and those kind of things. But basically, this is the time period on which it happens. And again, I would submit, and this is something I've thought about for a long time, but all of us, or a lot of us up here anywhere, carry a gun for protection. It's our constitutional right to do. If you're in the police force, you might use a bulletproof vest. That's our equivalent of a shield. We might have alarm systems in our home. We have locks that we bolt the door with. So there's nothing really wrong with protecting yourself. And if someone really wants to kill you, you need weapons to protect yourself. So the whole idea of having swords, policemen have weapons and shields and stuff, knives, shields, and armor, specifically the armor. The armor can't hurt anybody. It's completely protective. So why would making armor be a bad thing? And of course it wouldn't. So keep that in mind. He taught women how to see behind them. In other words, he invented the mirror. You can always look at water and get a reflection, but to actually create a mirror that you could look at and see, yourself. So it was as an invention of Azazel. So he made a mirror, taught them how to make mirrors, how to make bracelets, ornaments, and all kinds of jewelry using precious stones, the beautifying of the eyes for makeup and various colors. Now, again, everyone, and even anciently in Israel, used makeup. The ladies always used makeup, especially if you have some sort of a deformity. The makeup may help a little, or some sort of covering or whatever. But notice this, it said nothing wrong with makeup per se, nothing wrong with mirrors, nothing demonic or anything about it, but it led them astray into fornication and ungodliness to become corrupt in all their ways. So I just want you to think about this for a minute. They could have become fornicators and ungodly whether they had the makeup or not. So again, what is the shields and the swords and the mirrors and the makeup? What is the story behind it? Is what I'm getting to. Now look at this last part here. It says Semyaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. Now I'm not sure exactly what enchantments are. When we get to like Deuteronomy 10, there's a list of things like enchanters and wizards and necromancers and things like that. And the rabbis have a detailed description of what the Canaanite version of those things are. And that's an interesting study in itself. But something to enchant is to like to change someone's demeanor. So if there's an animal that doesn't normally attack and you corner it, or I get it to where you walk in on it, and I make some really loud bangs, I might get it to attack you. Or if an animal is getting ready to attack and somehow music calms it down. So something along those lines as far as what enchant, if it's the same thing as the Canaanite version. But anyway, root cuttings. Basically, you're taking certain plants and taking the roots of them for whatever reason. This could be, again, for dyes, like the makeup, could be the herbal medicine. Now, we're not supposed to commit sorcery, which is altering the mind with drugs, but we do use medicine. And the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about herbal medicine books, things like that. You don't want someone that's dying to be.
It's glary again.
Out of pain, if at all
Sorry.
possible. And if there's an herb or something that fixes the ailment, you want to heal them. So, root cuttings. Amaros, another angel, taught how to resolve enchantments. So whatever this is that Semyaza taught, he taught the opposite, how to do the opposite. So for instance, if I create something and make a poison, and then you eat it and you die, this guy might do the antidote for the poison, or something along those lines. It wouldn't have anything to do with makeup, but it's some sort of enchantment, root cutting, something. So Bakriel taught astrology. Now, if it's astrology like we understand, trying to tell the future or some sort of a pagan structure, we'd understand why that would be definitely wrong. If it's astronomy in general, the courses of the sun, moon, and the stars, again, you kind of wonder why. Kokabel, and this is interesting. The word El means God, and Kokav is the Hebrew word for star. So this is like the god of the stars. He may have just taken that name, but he taught the constellations or the signs. So again, nothing wrong with learning the constellations. Timrel taught the knowledge of clouds, and we're not sure exactly what that is either, but some form of astrology. And another guy taught the courses of the moon, the sun, the stars, things like that. And all mankind rather began to perish when they cried out of heaven. So here's my thought. it's not so much that someone taught them and whoever, but taught them how to make armor or how to make makeup or about the moon phases or how to calculate things with the stars or astrology or astronomy anyway. But what they did was collectively took this information and reshaped everything. So for instance, we've learned from the Essenes that the original calendar is the same one in Genesis, but it's a solar calendar, not a lunar one. So it always starts at the spring equinox of that year and goes forward. So, and there was a prophecy that somewhere along the line that the Pharisees or some of the Jews would come along and pervert the calendar. And you and I are thinking again, why do we care? I don't care what calendar you use. When it's springtime, we plant stuff, and when it's fall, we harvest and we eat our food, and who cares? But it's important to them as priests. And again, it's a way to have, I think what Paul says is a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. It looks godly. It's a false religious system. And so we have that today. Think of a cult. Any cult that we have here in the United States is going to call itself Christian. So if you don't know anything, if you're not a Christian, you don't know anything about it, and you go to one church that is a real Christian church, they're going to talk about Christ and how you need to, be a part of their denomination and do what's right and avoid what's wrong. You go to a cult and they may teach the exact opposite things, but they're going to say they're the real Christians, they're the real ones, and you need to do it their way because everyone else is corrupt. So just because you call yourself a Christian or a patriarch or godly doesn't mean you are. And you may be a con artist, or you may just be confused because of what you've been taught. So think about this then. So if you have a society that wants good things, and these angels,
God bless, see you tomorrow, hopefully.
Angels appear and they say, well, the God of heaven is left you high and dry. We can help. Number one, if you're sick, we'll show you how to make medicine. If somebody's going to attack you, we'll show you how to make swords and shields and ones that can't be broken, And then the ladies want to be beautiful. And, you might even say, well, if you have a deformity, maybe we can fix that. So here's a mirror so you can see what you're doing. Here's how to make jewelry. Here's how to make, this kind of stuff. And that in itself wouldn't be a problem if they'd say, now worship God. But they turn the whole thing around. Now, if the Essenes are correct in saying that it was a solar calendar instead of a lunar one, I thought it's interesting that this guy here teaches the courses of the moon. And again, why would we care? That like the moon phases, it's every 29 and a half days to new moon or full moon to full moon. And it's fun to look at a calendar and look at moon phases and get a telescope, go outside and watch it. It's always a nice hobby to have is that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, if we say, well, the solar stuff is by a God who's weird, and I'm going to tell you the truth of things, how to figure out the real time periods, and it goes by moon phases and by astrology and constellations and enchantments and root cuttings. So 90% of this stuff is true. I mean, it's nothing made up. There really is a moon. God made it. It has phases. But if I take it and introduce new information to you and then twist it, not even so much twist the information, but say the reason you didn't know about it is because the guy up there doesn't like you very much. He's wanting to enslave you. Well, come on my side and we'll take care of things. So this is a major con from the fallen angels. And I just thought it would be kind of interesting to look at it that way. Now, if we go back to Genesis, and just look at...
Anne must be out with the cats. I was never here. So she must be doing the cats. Otherwise, she'd be saying good night too.
The story again. We have Lamech, Cain's descendant, who takes a wife from Canaan and does not have a child, and takes another wife. She has a child, and it's not because she was normally barren, but she did too many abortions and tried to do the stuff that all the girls do, and they had problems. That would have been about the time that the fallen angels would have been teaching stuff like that. So to take an herb and cause an abortion, or to take another herb and make sure you don't have an abortion, is something that would be learned or perverted. But then Ada has Jabal, who is the father, and the students, those are idioms. So if I'm beginning to learn piano, I don't know hardly anything, and I need to go to a piano teacher and learn. I'm a student. So I am a son of the piano, just like the son of the prophets. Those are people that aren't prophets, but we just study prophecy. So you and I are the sons of prophets. We're not prophets, though. When you become a prophet or become the father of something, it means you're the master. So if you invented music or invented this new kind of flute, you are the father of it. And if I want to study it, I'm a son of it. Not that you're really my father, but it's that type of thing. So he's the father of those that dwell in tents and have cattle. So how to make cattle,
Arabs.
Breed cattle, tents, this kind of stuff. Jubal was the father of all such that handle the harp and the organ, so musical instruments. And then Tubal-Cain was brass and iron, so artificer in every form of it. So tools of brass and iron, and also weapons. Well, if we put Enoch and this together, the angels begin teaching this stuff, and this is about the time when it happened in the days of Jared. And so these are I just wanted to kind of pull that out. So this is interesting. So number one, really, the only thing I wanted to show in this study is that when we look at Jasher and Enoch and some of the other texts in Genesis, we have a little more of a complete story and more things show up. And the angels that fell, that corrupted everything pre-flood, there's a lot of other things too, but basically, much like Satan in Genesis when it said, has not God said that you'll eat of every tree of the fruit of the garden? Did he really say the day you eat of it, you'll die, and you're not even supposed to touch it? Did you really say that? Satan's never really lying. He's just getting you to doubt. And these guys may have actually taught real things, but they taught it in such a way as it's a different form. You could probably watch anything you want to on TV, and it probably wouldn't bother you. But if all you do is watch TV, you're not going to be studying scripture. If every night you go to bowling and then to band practice and then out to see a movie and then to do something, you're never going to have time to study scripture.
Amen.
So it's pretty important that we get our priorities in right. So if you go to a bad church and they're telling you it's okay to have an abortion, it's okay to do this, to fornicate, et cetera, that is a form of godliness, but it's not godly. It would be cultic, kind of what these angels did. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I don't know if you guys have ever thought of it, but I've thought of this several times. It's like, what does brass have to do with sin or not sin? And if I have a pocket knife, why is that, what was the big deal? But it's how Satan and the fallen angels use true things to corrupt you. So, okay. So, for instance, someone in your family dies when you're a young child. You may decide to become a policeman and fight for truth and justice. That would be good. You may decide to be a criminal and pay back those people that did it. So, the stuff that happens in your life and whoever talks to you and tries to train you can lead you astray or lead you into righteousness. That's what I'm getting at with this. So that's just my study for today, but we wanted to look at chapter 4 and then Jasher and Enoch. So at this place, we'll go ahead and stop, and I'll go to the chat room and just see if there's any questions. Okay, the sound seems to be fine. Okay. Okay, one person said there's no sound. And that's YouTube, so I'm not sure what that's. Maybe it was off and on. So looks like I'm doing okay as far as the sound goes. Okay.
I think she's gone, Diane.
I did have some problems. One of the problems that might be going on is I get everything set up, and
that's what that was good. What Han said. Tell Jesus to say hello to Wyatt. That was really nice. I thought that was a really good suggestion.
Go somewhere for an hour and come back, and if the computer has turned parts of itself off, it seemed like it did that. I had to exit out and go back into it to get it to work. So that might have something to do with it. So if everybody that had problems with no sound, if you refreshed it and then it worked okay, that would be a good thing. Okay, Overbuilt says it's an amazing story when you think about it. Yeah, when you think about it that way, it's and again, it's not so much that there's even demons tempting us today, but there are people that are trying to pervert our thought, tell us that the Bible is not, godliness, that the Bible is actually hate speech, things like that. So we need to be careful with that. Okay, Frank said there's no sound, and then Overbuilt said there's good sound, and Suzanne said she hears sound. Okay, refreshed. Okay, Diane said that she refreshed it, and then the sound was okay. I think it was probably my problem or this computer, just the way that it probably glitched, but I don't think it was the new mic setup. So let's see here. Okay, my wife said she had no sound and refreshing didn't work. Okay, hopefully we'll keep going here. Okay. Okay, lots of good stuff. Okay. And then frozen. Sometimes that happens too. Okay, let's see. Question. Is this recorded? Can I still listen to it later? Yeah, it should be, unless we had some sort of a glitch with the sound, in which case you'll just see my lips moving. But yeah, basically we try to do this on YouTube and Facebook. And then sometimes on, we've been trying off and on to do it on Telegram. And that they've got it halfway set up, but it's not automated, so it kind of has problems. Okay, so let's see. Very interesting. Also, it would be great if you turned on stars or subscribers on Facebook. Oh, I'll have to look at that. Oh, Chris. Hi, Chris. Yeah, we'll see about doing something like that. Sounds like a question. Okay, and then a question here is, how and why did the angels fall? Well, originally there was Satan and a rebellion that fell, and that was about the time of the creation of the earth. So back in Genesis 1, which is about 6,000 years ago. Later on, there was a angel that fell, and sometime around the days of Jared or slightly before, his name was Azazel. So the first one that fell was Lucifer, or in Hebrew he's called Hallel. And then the next one was Azazel, who basically tried to recreate start a family, create his own race, that kind of a thing. And he did a fairly decent job of it. And then slightly later in time, there was an angel named Shemyaza who convinced 200 of his other angels to come down to earth and do the same thing. And people speculate on whether that was specifically just because they wanted to create something in their own image, or if it was specifically to try to mess up the genetics so that the Messiah couldn't come. There's lots of different speculations on that. And we just have the basic understanding. So the history for the fallen angels, the Genesis 6 account, it's mentioned just briefly in Genesis 6. Moses doesn't want to get into the entire history. He just wants to say, this happened, and it was because of those angels and the mighty men of old, those stories. And then he continues on. And so anyway, and so then that was the next rebellion. And then we have the entire world getting corrupted, and then we had a flood that basically destroyed everything. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons and their 3 wives made it through and then repopulated the planet. And then we had outbreaks of things in Sodom and Gomorrah and other things dealing with angels. But that's basically it. Why they did that, again, there's a couple of different theories, but these are the ones that Peter talks about in where he says that they are chained under darkness until judgment, and the word there in Greek is tartaros. So, like when you and I, if we're Christians and we die, we're absent from the body, we're present with the Lord. If we're not Christians, we go to Hades and await judgment. So there's a compartment there. There's a different place called Tartaros where the angels are kept. And so it's pretty interesting to look at that. But the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Dead Sea Scroll, the Book of Giants gives a fairly complete history of the pre-flood world as far as that's concerned. But then there are comments and other things given by early church fathers, Josephus, things like that. Matter of fact, let me pull this up. You guys know that this is my e-sword. Let me exit out on this. So this is our e-sword, and we have like all these different Bibles, that kind of stuff. I'm run down here. So we've got Bibles, you've got commentaries, dictionaries, and then study notes. But over here we have another thing, and it's the reference library. So in here, some of the things you can download for free. There's the Ante-Nicene Fathers, volume 1 to 9. And then I've also got Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus, Wars of the Jews by Josephus. And there's a few other things like that. So this will get you the early church fathers and Josephus and others, so you can get it for free and read it. So really interesting in that. And I'm glad we have that in eSword. Let's see. Okay, so we did pretty good today. If there's any other questions on anything, as far as things that I'm doing, I'm still working on the Damascus Covenant and putting that book together. And we might start looking at some of that in the near future. And things are going fairly well. I did want to mention that we have, let me pull up one thing. And if we go to our YouTube, and get out of here. So under channels, there we go. Channels that I follow are Prophecy Watchers, and you guys know about them quite a bit. And then Calvary Chapel, Johnson County is my home church. And then we have Calvary Chapel Emporia. They have 37 subscribers, and I think they need 100 to actually get the...
Han, are you going to play it? Are you going to play that Trey Smith one?
The live streaming going. So I just wanted to let you know that here's 2 Calvary Chapels that I highly recommend. So to let you know, if you're interested, you can subscribe. My home church is 503 now, so they're doing really well. And you can always come here, and we'll have our live streams and other things. The other thing is with Bible Facts, we have...
Yeah, good one, Han. Usually if you're playing copyright stuff, it gives you a warning and says we have detected copyright material in your stream. So just keep an eye open for that. I hope he doesn't copyright because he's got some really good info. Okay, guys, I might call it quits. This is out. Thanks for joining. See you tomorrow, guys.